Chapter 261, Finrod falls to Sauron, the magic swordsman. Lucian appears, third update. A bolt of lightning, thicker than a water tank and crackling with raw power, tore from the Thunder Giant's outstretched hand. Sauron's composure cracked. How can a mere human command such overwhelming magic? Even gods tremble at storms like this. In principle, a Maya's soul cannot be destroyed. Should their body perish, the spirit remains intact, drifting in the void until it can be reforged. Only those tainted as fire demons, souls condemned, are lost forever, hurled into Iluvatar's judgment. And yet, this lightning was enough to rend flesh from bone. Enraged, Sauron summoned his great dark blade, planting it before him. Shadows swirled, coalescing into an immense onyx shield. The thunderbolt struck it head-on, crackling and hissing, but within heartbeats, the brilliant flash was snuffed out. Darkness sprawled outward, devouring every spark of light. Lucian's eyes narrowed. He had unleashed his ultimate electromagnetic cannon, confident it could fell even the mightiest foe, but Sauron's shield absorbed it as easily as a sponge soaks water. A cold knot of doubt formed in Lucian's chest. If this was his strongest attack, what hope did he stand against the Dark Lord's true power? Lucian trained the ultimate electromagnetic cannon on Sauron and squeezed the trigger. A searing beam of crackling energy shot forth, but it shattered harmlessly against the Dark Lord's defenses. At his side, the plasma electromagnetic cannon hummed with power, its charge-up instantaneous. It lacked the raw might of the ancient magic-infused cannon, but at least it could fire without waiting 5 or 6 minutes to draw on archaic sorcery. Still, neither weapon could faze Sauron. Lucian clenched his teeth. If this doesn't work, I dread to think how strong Morgoth must be. Sauron, despite being the greatest of the Maiar, was no match for even the least of the Valar. He dared only to surface when the gods' eyes were elsewhere. Morgoth, however, lay supremely above them all, even more powerful than Manwë Sulimo. It had taken the combined might of the Valar to cast him down into the void. A plan formed in Lucian's mind. Raising his voice, he called down the storm. Tendrils of lightning and thunder wove around him, coalescing into a towering thunder giant 200 meters tall. Crackling energy danced along its colossal limbs. In an instant, Lucian's own form blurred, sinews stretching and fur sprouting across his body until he stood in lupine shape, massive, fierce, and precisely the thunder giant's height. He hurled his head back and unleashed a bone-rattling howl that rent the sky. Storm clouds roiled, jagged forks of lightning screamed across the heavens, and then, with the force of a hurricane, the wolf giant leapt at Sauron's armored silhouette. Its claws, charged with raw storm power, struck the Dark Lord's defenses as the thunder giant followed, each step booming like artillery fire. Thus began the clash of ancient evil and modern sorcery, Lucian's defiance against the might of Morgoth's greatest lieutenant. Lucian's heart pounded as he guided the Thunder Colossus into position, its massive frame crackling with charged energy. He'd almost forgotten that this adversary was no ordinary foe. It was Sauron himself, the Dark Lord of Mordor, King of the Black Tower, Master of Darkness. Before forging the One Ring, Sauron had served as Morgoth's lieutenant and even reigned as the Wolf King. From his fortress on the Island of Wolves, he commanded legions of wolves and vampires, among them the Maya-strength wolf Zorgluin and the vampire queen Sirenwithe, each one utterly devoted to him. He, too, could shift seamlessly into the form of a colossal wolf or take on the dread visage of a vampire. Lucian's Colossus focused its power on the ultimate electromagnetic cannon, unleashing a searing beam that blazed through the dusk. But in close quarters, the machine was cumbersome. As Sauron lunged in his wolf form, with jaws like iron and fangs dripping venom, the Colossus staggered under the assault. Metal groaned, and sparks flew as the behemoth's limbs were rent apart. Lucian's vision blurred from the force of the blows. Then, in an instant, a feral scream split the air. Sauron halted mid-strike and collapsed back into his tall, dark-cloaked human form, eyes blazing with renewed fury. "Sauron!" A clear, ringing voice called out. Lucian looked up to see Finrod swooping down on a great forest moose, its antlers gilded by the last rays of sunlight. Rider and mount landed with a graceful thud, Finrod's sword already gleaming at his side. "Your fight is with me now." As Finrod squared off against the Dark Lord, Lucian staggered to his feet, ready to lend his strength to the renewed clash. The The battle for Middle-earth's fate had only just begun. Lucian's enchanted elven blade, wreathed in pure light, sliced into the wolf's leg with a single brilliant arc. The great beast howled, stumbling back, and Sauron's own roar faltered into a gasp. "Finrod!" he bellowed, panic flashing in his eyes. Though the elven prince's strength did not quite match Sauron's, the gap was slim, and one misstep could cost him everything. Seizing the moment, Lucian dispelled the thunder giant he had been sustaining. The Titan's oppressive force had drained him nearly dry, leaving him no strength for more intricate spells. Lightning, he now knew, barely scratched the Dark Lord. He needed something stronger, something more cunning. As Lucian's power gathered, Finrod vaulted from his moose, golden light swirling around him. With a cry of challenge, "First your hound, then your master Morgoth," he swept his elven sword overhead and charged, moving like a shaft of dawn aimed straight at the heart of darkness. Lucian judged the elk under him with growing impatience. Against orcs, charging atop such a towering beast had been devastatingly effective. But facing warriors of Sauron's caliber, the elk was more a liability than an asset. At close range, he could dart and strike far faster on foot than any stag ever could. On the field of battle, Thor sneered at Finrod's furious onslaught. "Ha ha! Have you already forgotten how your grandfather and uncle perished? I'll send you to Mandos first. Then your brother and sister will follow." He laughed as his blade flashed. Finrod's answer came in a lightning-quick slash, aimed straight at Thor's calf. Had Thor not paused to deal with Lucian a moment ago, the strike might have found its mark, but even where it grazed, the wound vanished in an instant. Thor flexed the unscathed leg and grinned. "You're too fast, elf," he admitted. "I couldn't land a proper blow." Across the field, Sauron and Finrod had locked themselves into a dazzling duel. Black shadow clashing against golden brilliance, each blow sending pulses of energy rippling through the air. Lucian watched, frowning. They were simply too swift for his wand-crafted spells, especially without a proper focus. He couldn't summon a high-level incantation quickly enough to even graze them. Then an idea struck him. There, amongst the fallen, lay an elven longsword, its blade etched with ancient runes. If he could claim an elven weapon, perhaps he could match the speed and power these titans displayed. With renewed purpose, Lucian kicked his elk free, leapt down, and raced toward the nearest corpse. The runes glinted in the dying light, a promise of power he couldn't ignore. It really works. The moment Lucian grasped the elven blade, he sensed its power. This sword could channel magic much like a wand. It might not rival the legendary staves of fairy tale or the cosmic artifacts of the Marvel universe, but it felt more alive in his hand than any wand he'd seen in the wizarding world of Harry Potter. Before departing Middle-earth, the Noldor had apprenticed for centuries under Aule, the Vala of Smithcraft. Under his tutelage, they mastered the creation of enchanted weapons and artifacts. Fëanor's Silmarils, for example, shone with such brilliance that even the Valar marveled, and Morgoth himself coveted those jewels, tearing them from their setting to crown his own dark throne. The Elves of the Light drew strength not only from the two trees, but also from the gleaming armor and rune blades they forged. "All right," Lucian muttered, eyes gleaming. "Let me be a swordsman for once." He channeled every spark of electricity lingering in his veins. In a flash of blue-white light, his body dissolved into a crackling streak of energy, hurtling him back into the fray between Finrod and the Dark Lord. Finrod was already reeling. Delicate runes in his mithril armor had erupted into jagged fissures, and Sauron advanced without mercy. Lucian's blade hummed with power as he prepared to intervene, and perhaps turn the tide of battle. "Take the sword, God's sharpness!" Lucian burst from the shadows and swung his blade in a vicious arc at Sauron's neck, the enchanted edge blazing with radiant power. Sauron merely sneered. Quick reflexes, but atrocious form. Against Finrod's legendary elven swordplay, Lucian's strike was fast, yet unrefined. The blade itself bore countless flaws, hardly a worthy weapon. With a graceful sidestep, Sauron let the imperfect steel carve empty air and offered no resistance. Author's note: chapters will now update each evening at 6 p.m. Chapter 262, The Power of Sword and Magic. Sauron stumbled back to avoid the blade, but a spray of blood instantly stained his neck. His eyes widened. This was no ordinary wound. A normal cut would heal in seconds. yet this one lay open, crimson flowing freely. "A cursed strike?" he hissed, voice cold. "You really think that will work on the Dark Lord?" As a Maya, Sauron recognized at once that this was no mere physical blow but a curse-imbued attack. With a lazy flick of his wrist, he summoned tendrils of dark energy. They snaked over his flesh, absorbing the malediction and sealing the gash in an instant. "Impressive resilience," he murmured, lips curling into a sneer. "But far from enough." Across the field, Lucian's jaw clenched. He had poured every ounce of his strength into the Divine Edge's shadowless curse. Even solid rock would have been sundered by such force, and yet here it was, only a shallow slice, and the curse's bleeding effect already undone. A grim light flickered in his eyes as he readied himself for what came next. Lucian halted mid-stride, aware that even a secondary god like Sauron was on an entirely different plane from ordinary mortals. He abandoned his assault and moved swiftly to Finrod's side, where the elven lord was gasping for breath. In their last exchange, Finrod had struggled, his once pristine armor cracked in several places, his body bearing the sorcerous cuts of Sauron's magic blade. Had Lucian's sneak attack failed, Finrod would have fallen. "Heal," Lucian murmured, fingertips glowing with soft golden light. The magic surged into Finrod's wounds, knitting flesh and sinew so swiftly that the elf staggered upright, unscarred. Without pausing, Lucian wove a second spell. "Restore," he intoned. A silver radiance spread over the fractured plates of Finrod's armor. Cracks sealed and decorative engravings leapt back into relief until the protective mail gleamed as though newly forged. Finrod brushed a hand over his restored breastplate and stood tall, eyes shining. Lucian exhaled. "I can't hope to slay Sauron by myself. My power isn't enough to deal him a fatal blow. But with you leading the charge and my magic at your back, we can overwhelm him." Finrod returned his gaze with equal resolve. "Thank you, Lucian." Together, they turned back to face the Dark Lord, ready to finish what they had begun. Lucian's timely warning had saved them from total annihilation. As he stood there, his healing magic still humming around him, Finrod stared in amazement. His own wounds and battered armor had been restored in moments. Yet it was Lucian, that formerly unarmed human, who'd cast spells 6 times more potent than his own. "My lord," Finrod said, voice trembling with gratitude, "I never imagined a human could wield such power. If you hadn't alerted us in time, Sauron's ambush, led by himself and countless orcs, would have slaughtered every last one of us." Lucian brushed off the praise with a modest nod. "We humans must do what we can. Right now, our task is simple. We must defeat Sauron." He swept his gaze across the battlefield, where elven archers and human marksmen were steadily pushing back the orcish horde. Preparation and long-range volleys had turned the tide, but the Dark Lord still loomed at the canyon's mouth, a grim silhouette against the sky. Lucian raised his sword and pointed it at Sauron. In that instant, the twin emblems of the 2 trees on Finrod's breastplate flared to life, bathing him in emerald and gold light. Gripping his elven blade, Finrod lifted it high and declared, "Leave this to me. Today, I will cut off Sauron's head myself." With those words, Finrod's form blurred into a pillar of golden radiance. He shot forward down the canyon like a thunderbolt. Across the battlefield, Sauron's smirk vanished, replaced by a fleeting look of alarm as he braced himself for the Elven Lord's charge. Lucian's dark power surged like a storm through his veins. The orc host was faltering against the light elves, and unless he captured Finrod and the human companion at once, the battlefield would be lost. Clenching his teeth, he unleashed his deadliest technique. The Divine Edge, shadowless. Arcane lightning crackled along Lucian's blade as he darted in behind Finrod. While the elf leader was locked in combat with Lord Sauron, Lucian saw his opening and struck. But Sauron, anticipating the move, held his ground. With a single practiced sweep of his enchanted sword, he cleaved through the invisible Divine Edge, deflecting Lucian's blow. "This is nothing," Sauron sneered, his voice cold as steel. Lucian's lips curled into a knowing smile. "You'd be wise not to dismiss me so quickly." He uttered the disarming incantation with precision. "Expelliarmus!" Too close to evade the spell, Sauron staggered as unseen forces ripped the sword from his grasp. The enchanted blade flew from his hand, clattering across the shattered earth. For a heartbeat, the battlefield held its breath as its most feared warrior stood unarmed before Lucian. The tide of war had just turned. Lucian's recent Divine Edge Shadowless curse had proven that his magic wasn't worthless, just severely weakened when used against Sauron. With a snarl, the Dark Lord hissed, "Return," and shot out his hand, intent on recalling his sword. He hadn't expected his opponent's magic to behave so strangely. But Lucian would not let him have his way. He tapped into his supercharged reserves, anchoring the sword with an immense, unseen force. Though he couldn't block Sauron's recall outright, he slowed the blade's return to a crawl. That was all the opening Finrod needed. The elven swordsman, ever watchful, spotted the momentary hesitation and thrust his blade deep into Sauron's chest. The Dark Lord had no time to evade. Finrod's strike found its mark. Vera and Maya, as pure spirits, would have shrugged off such a wound. In Middle-earth, however, they'd each forged a physical form, complete with heart, lungs, and blood. For a being newly embodied, a blade piercing a vital organ was far more than a scratch. It was a grievous injury that would not heal easily. King Thingol, also known as Elu Thingol, was the ruler of the Grey Elves, and one of the 3 elven kings of the Two Trees era. When the elves first journeyed to Valinor, the undying land where the Valar dwelt, Thingol beheld the splendor of the Two Trees and bathed in their radiant light. Yet, on his return to Middle-earth, he took a fateful detour through the great forests of Beleriand, where he met Melian the Maya. Drawn by her otherworldly grace and her power to shield the trees from Morgoth's blight, Thingol fell deeply in love. Abandoning his people's pilgrimage, he chose to settle in Middle-earth and founded the kingdom of Doriath beneath Melian's protection. There, the king and the Maya bore a daughter, Luthien Tinuviel, whose heritage was unique, half elven, half divine. Blessed by the light of the Two Trees and endowed with her mother's Maya blood, Luthien grew to be the most beautiful and powerful of all elven kind, surpassing even the Lady Galadriel in both grace and ability. Later, deep within Angband, Morgoth's impenetrable fortress, Lucian wove a potent sleep spell over the Dark Lord and his war host. As Morgoth and his captains succumbed to an enchanted slumber, Lucian and the human hero Beren slipped past the guards. Their goal was as daring as it was desperate, to steal a Silmaril from Morgoth's iron crown. Guided by the faint inner glow of the jewel, Lucian crept forward while Beren stood watch. When they reached the throne room's darkest corner, Lucian reached up, his fingers closing around the heated band of the crown. With a single, silent breath, he invoked the ward he had painstakingly prepared. Morgoth's crown shattered with a muted crack, and the Silmaril floated free, its light pulsing like a heartbeat. Lucian caught it in a leather pouch before the spell's hold broke, and the Dark Lord's roar of fury echoed through the vast halls. Behind them, Finrod, the elven king who bore a long debt of friendship to Beren, met them at the corridor's mouth, blade drawn against any pursuer. Together they fled, Silmaril in hand, as alarm bells rang and the ramparts filled with orcs. Only the magical exhaustion of their opponents allowed the 3 of them to reach a narrow passage that led out of the fortress. All across Middle-earth, news of this audacious theft set the Noldor ablaze with hope. Yet not all elves celebrated. Thingol, king of the Sindar and Doriath, refused to aid the war against Morgoth. He nursed a generations-old grudge. When the Noldor fled Valinor, they slew many of Thingol's kin among the Teleri, the Sea Elves. Protected by Melian's girdle, a barrier no force of Morgoth could penetrate, Doriath remained secure, but its ruler's heart was closed to Noldoran pleas. Back in the tunnels beneath Angband, the theft cut Mordor's lieutenants to the bone. Sauron, Morgoth's chief lieutenant, felt the Silmaril's loss like a dagger in his dark heart. The wound tore at his form, and corrupt energies coursed wildly through his limbs. Sauron's agony blossomed into a dangerous frenzy. Shadowfire flickered around him as he sought to burn away the pain. Lucian and Finrod, aware of the consequences, dared not tarry. With Beren mortally wounded by a pursuing Balrog's whip, they cast him into an alcove filled with healing water drawn from Terlinda's springs. There, Finrod knelt, chanting elven litanies as the jewel's pure light seeped through the cloth over Beren's chest. Lucian turned back into the tunnel, determined to hold the line until his friend recovered. Behind them, the fortress's dark halls dimmed with chaos. Orcs and fell beasts clashed, scrambling to defend their master's prison. But the Silmaril's theft, and the sudden rise of Sauron's unbridled power, had thrown Angband into disarray. Alone in shadow and ruin, Lucian vowed to see this deed through, no matter the cost. Chapter 263, Sauron's Defeat in the Canyon, second update. I remember you, human. Sauron's eyes blazed with hatred as he glared at Lucian. With a cruel snarl, he gave the command, "Fall back, everyone!" But Lucian would not allow the Dark Lord to slip away now, not when he was mortally wounded. "Your Royal Highness," Lucian shouted, raising his sword, "we cannot let him escape." At that moment, Finrod, his silver hair streaming behind him, leapt forward without hesitation. "To me the kill!" he cried. Before Lucian could restrain him, the elf prince was already charging, blade gleaming in the canyon's dim light. "You court death, Sauron!" Finrod taunted. Sauron snarled. As he watched his two enemies close in, he abandoned his desperate attempt to heal the wound in his chest. Dark power surged through him like a living storm, and he unleashed it all in one brutal wave. Shadows billowed outward, slamming into Lucian and Finrod like a rolling black cloud. Lucian staggered beneath the crushing force, his armor creaking. But before the darkness could swallow him, Finrod lifted his holy sword and intoned an elven prayer. "By the light of the sacred tree, may our blade shine for all elvenkind." A brilliant golden radiance flared around Finrod's sword and coursed through Lucian's blade as well. The two warriors pressed forward, light clashing against shadow, determined to end Sauron's reign once and for all. Lucian didn't hesitate. A golden magic circle sprang to life at his feet as he intoned, "Light magic, field of light." A brilliant, holy radiance exploded outward, purging the taint of darkness from his very core. Instead of surging ahead like Finrod, Lucian steadied himself against the lingering shadow's pull, and then vanished in a flash of apparition. When he reappeared, he was several yards behind Sauron. Apparition was no cure-all. Teleporting straight into an enemy's line of sight could be a death sentence if they countered instantly. Better to strike from safety. His first goal was simply to shake off the dark power's chokehold. Above him, he whispered, "Ascend." He vaulted into the air and summoned an elven longsword in each hand. A crackling wave of electric blue light hissed toward Sauron's back as Lucian drove the blade in his left hand down with ruthless efficiency. The edge bit into the back of Sauron's skull. The Dark Lord snarled, still pinning Finrod beneath a swirl of black magic, and twisted his enchanted sword upward to ward off the blow. Seizing the momentary opening, Lucian thrust the second longsword, clutched in his right hand, straight into Sauron's exposed flank. Lucian's blade rang against the Black Demon King's armor with a thunderous clang, skidding harmlessly off Sauron's breastplate. He couldn't match Finrod's power. He lacked the Holy Tree's blessing and wielded only a common elven sword, so piercing the mail had never been his true intent. Avada Kedavra! Lucian thrust his wand forward. A jagged bolt of emerald green smashed into Sauron's chestplate, striking the Dark Lord's very soul. Immediately, Sauron's massive form went rigid, and the suffocating weight of his shadow magic dissolved. He'd never imagined a death curse could stagger one so steeped in dark power, but even a single moment's disruption was all Lucian needed for their plan to succeed. At that instant, Finrod burst past Lucian's side and launched himself at the immobilized Demon King. "Sauron, no!" the Dark Lord snarled, realization dawning too late. He wrenched off the gauntlet clamped over his wounded heart, snatched up Lucian's abandoned elven sword, and summoned a roaring wave of fire magic. Crimson flames licked the steel so fiercely that the blade began to melt, its edges sizzling into molten rivulets. Across the battlefield, Finrod lifted his own sacred sword. Its silvery light flared defiantly against the charred gloom. The final confrontation between light and shadow had begun. Lucian dug in his heels as another wave of dark energy blasted past him toward Finrod, sending the elf reeling. He gritted his teeth. He knew this backlash would tear at his own wounds, but there was no time to hesitate. If his body shattered now, it might take decades to rebuild. Ignis Lux, light explosion. He roared the words and gathered every scrap of radiance in his veins, only to be cut off in mid-cast. The elf-forged sword in his right hand liquefied on the spot, its steel dripping like molten silver. Even so, a brilliant magic circle flared behind Lucian, and a pillar of pure, golden light, wider than a siege tower, erupted upward, slamming directly into Sauron's chest. The Dark Lord staggered, his form locked once more in the ancient stasis that only true holy power could enforce. Lucian let himself smile through the pain. The holy light magic he'd learned in fairy tale echoed the elves' own holy tree rites almost perfectly, and it was one of the few forces capable of countering Morgoth's shadow. I should get elected president soon and dive into fairy law, he thought. With even a fraction more training, he could harness far stronger spells. If I dared to unleash the law of light's supreme magic instead of this light explosion, my limbs might have stiffened for a moment, but I could have obliterated Sauron's body outright. I still remember the time I cast that town-wide radiance barrier. It was like breathing sunlight into every street at once. Bah! A blade of crimson light erupted from Lucian's hand, slashing through the air and shearing off Sauron's right arm at the elbow. Even as one of the most formidable of the Maiar, Sauron could only muster one final desperate strike, and still failed to defend his limb. He staggered back, clutching the jagged wound, blood spattering his ashen face. Lucian didn't hesitate. "Light magic, radiant array," he cried, summoning dozens of concentrated beams of holy light overhead. The rays fell like a meteor shower, each shard of brilliance weaving into a dense formation that left no safe haven for Sauron's battered form. His strategy was deliberate, immobilize rather than kill. He needed Sauron alive and pinned until his ally Finrod, the ancient elven lord, could deliver the true finishing blow. Behind Lucian's blinding display, Finrod advanced with calm precision, his silver hair glinting in the luminous downpour. In one fluid motion, the 1,000-year-old elf lifted his blade, the edge gleaming like starlight. He swung in a single, unbroken arc, intent on severing Sauron's head in a swift, decisive stroke. But at that very moment, something utterly unforeseen occurred. A colossal wolf burst from behind Sauron, positioning its massive frame between the Dark Lord and Lucian's light array spell. At the same moment, a striking vampire queen, bat wings unfurled and twin bone swords in hand, intercepted Finrod's charge. These were Sauron's most devoted lieutenants, the towering wolf Jaggerluin and the vampiric sovereign Sarenwithy. Having received Sauron's command to fall back, they were already shepherding the orcish host toward Angband. "Jaggerluin will cover the rear," Sauron had ordered. While Sarenwithy clashed blade against blade with Finrod, the elf struggled under her frenzied assault. After several brutal exchanges, the vampire queen shimmered into a cloud of sanguine mist, bearing away the gravely wounded Sauron into the retreating horde. Left alone, Jaggerluin swelled to a gargantuan height, well over 100 meters, its jaws snapping at Lucian and Finrod. Lucian ground his teeth and drew a deep breath. Focusing every ounce of his power, he activated his plasma electromagnetic cannon. A searing beam tore through the wolf's open maw, scorched its throat, then blasted into its belly. With a bone-shaking roar, Jaggerluin collapsed. In swift unison, Finrod stepped forward and with a single, precise stroke, severed the beast's head from its shoulders. Lucian's heart sank as he watched the orc horde dissolve into inky black smoke and vanish toward Morgoth's realm. Regret flashed in his eyes. Pursuing them meant risking an attack by the Dark Lord himself. Reluctantly, he signaled his troops to stand down. Behind him, the elven host reformed, its ranks painfully thinned to just 1,000 warriors. Their lightning salvo and rain of arrows had cut the orcs down by half, but the enemy's numbers had been so vast that the victory felt far from decisive. Even as they caught their breath, it was clear they could not press the advantage. Finrod approached Lucian, his relief palpable. "Without you," he said, voice trembling with gratitude, "our people would be dead or enslaved by now." Lucian nodded, the weight of their lives and the battles yet to come reflected in his steady gaze. Finrod regarded Lucian with quiet solemnity. "Lucian, this ring belonged to my father when he departed Valinor. Today, I entrust it to you. If ever you find yourself in need, no matter how perilous the situation, come to me. You have my vow." He slipped the slender band off his finger and laid it in Lucian's palm. Two emerald-eyed serpents were intertwined around the ring, their heads meeting to cradle a golden corolla, the sigil of the Finfin line. Lucian lifted the ring for a closer look and couldn't help but grin. "Quite fitting for someone born in the Snake Yard," he quipped. "It seems the Ring of Barahir has been retired. Long live the Ring of Lucian." He slid the ring onto his finger, and at once a warm pulse of power swept through him. This was no ordinary ornament, but a relic infused with the living magic of the sacred tree, a conduit for spellcraft more potent than any wand. In that moment, Lucian also felt the truth of Finrod's promise and knew he could rely on his new ally's unbreakable oath. Lucian's thoughts raced as he recalled the old tale. To win Thingol's daughter Luthien, Beren son of Barahir had sought the aid of Finrod Felagund. Bearing the Ring of Barahir as token, Beren begged the king of Nargothrond to join him in a desperate venture into Morgoth's realm and steal back a Silmaril. Though he knew it would cost him his life, the noble Finrod set aside his crown, gathered 10 of his bravest elves, and rode with Beren to Angband, only to fall by Sauron's hand long before they reached their goal. "We can't rely on the second and third princes to hold the line much longer," Lucian said, slipping the Ring of Barahir onto his finger and drawing the enchanted blade he had claimed from Sauron's own vaults. "The stone colossus I conjured with mimicry magic is merely rock. It won't withstand a dragon's assault. If we dawdle, the enemy will break through our center." Turning to Finrod, he issued his orders crisply. "Badu, take a small company and ride for Hithlum at once. Tell the High King everything we've seen and urge him to send troops to fortify this canyon. Better yet, have Fingon bring his host to reinforce the central pass. The rest of us will press on to the highlands." Finrod nodded gravely. Without a moment's hesitation, he sprang into action, rallying his captains and dispatching messengers to carry Lucian's plan into motion. Lucian watched his cousin Fingon stride to the edge of the canyon, sword gleaming in the waning light. Among their generation of elves, Fingon was unmatched in strength and skill. He could have faced Sauron alone and lived to tell the tale. Their forces had already shattered the Dark Lord's western host, reducing it to little more than a battered remnant. Now, all that was needed at the narrow pass was a token guard. The true danger pressed hard against the 3 concentric lines of defense farther east and west, lines that, if broken, would spill Morgoth's legions into the heart of their realm. "We'll leave a handful of archers and spearmen here to hold the ridge," Fingon decided, voice calm but firm. "The rest must reinforce the central and western bulwarks at once. If we falter, Morgoth's host will burst through." Lucian frowned. "By the time our messengers arrive, it may already be too late." He stepped forward, meeting Fingon's gaze. "Cousin, you know I can wield space magic. Let me carry you there." Fingon nodded without hesitation. In the weeks since mastering the rare art of teleportation, Lucian had delivered small detachments across mountain, forest, and river in a heartbeat. To be safe, they would not go alone. Finrod, the greatest knight in Fingon's command, and a man whose courage had saved Lucian's life more than once, would accompany them, along with a half-dozen spectral projections to scout ahead and guard their flanks. Lucian lifted his arms and closed his eyes. The air around them rippled as he wove the magic. First a shimmer, then a gust of wind that tugged at their cloaks. In less than half an hour's travel, by any other means an impossible sprint, they were already half a continent away, racing above the peaks. Another hour and a half would have been spent marching below, but this was no time for delays. With a final flourish, Lucian banished the phantoms and drew his companions out of the shifting portal. All at once, they stood on a high ridge overlooking Gthonion, the white city's spires glinting like starlight against the gathering clouds. Below them, banners snapped in the wind and the drums of war beat in the streets. Morgoth's forces were massing on the horizon, ready to crash against the walls. Finrod drew his sword and sheathed it again with a resolute click. His worry for his 2 younger brothers, stationed somewhere within the city's walls, flickered across his stern features. But there was no time for doubt. "For Gondolin," he murmured, and together they slipped down into the growing shadow of the city, falling in beside the roiling tide of its defenders. By now, the elf city was nothing but a sea of flame. When Lucian had left, the light elves still numbered in the thousands. Now fewer than a third remained, and the human contingent had dwindled to under 200. The once proud white marble statue of the elven guardian lay in shattered ruins, its fragments scattered across burning streets. On the eastern ramparts, Angrod and Agnor, bloodied and armor-stripped, struggled in vain against the demon dragon. To the north, Bergolas and Barahir, with the last human warriors and surviving elves, clung to the remaining half of the city wall, holding back wave after wave of Balrogs and Orcish foot soldiers. "Finish off the demon dragon," rang a cry through the smoke. "It leads the main host. Slay it, and their army will fall into chaos." Lucian acted without hesitation. He raced through the firelit rubble to stand beside Finrod, the brother's elder, whose skill dwarfed that of Angrod and Agnor combined. Together, Lucian and Finrod launched their assault. Finrod's blade cut deep into the dragon's flank, and Lucian drove the hilt home until the monster shuddered and collapsed, its final roar echoing like thunder. As the dragon's body went still, Sauron's dark form melted into the shadows, escaping the fate of his beast. Kneeling by the fallen foe, Lucian's eyes gleamed with ambition. If he could harness the dragon's remains to forge a dragon crystal, an artifact of unimaginable power, he might at last claim his destiny as a dragon slayer mage. Behind him, Angrod and Agnor sagged to their knees, armor cracked and scorched. Even fighting side by side, they had proven no match for their brother's might or the demon dragon's fury. Now, however, hope stirred in the embers of the conquered city. If they'd arrived even half an hour later, they'd be hauling away 2 corpses instead of fighting at all. "Death to the dragon!" Lucian roared. With a thought, he hurled Finrod like a living missile. The high elf spun through the air, sword in hand, aiming to decapitate the dragon in one clean stroke. The beast, sensing sudden peril, abandoned its savage onslaught against Angrod and Agenor. It unleashed a gout of crackling sorcerous flame at the elf, then snarled and fled. Better to live and regroup. For now it would summon Balrogs and the Orcish hordes rather than test its luck further against a waking power it could barely gauge. The dragon's final glance brimmed with grudging respect. "You are formidable," it seemed to hiss, then vanished into the gloom. Lucian watched the creature's retreat with a wry smile. Dragons might be terrifying, but like orcs, they were Morgoth's creations. Kill one, and it remained dead. Unlike Balrogs, which sometimes returned to the void, a dragon's end was final. He would not let his quarry slip away. "Operate!" Lucian shouted. In the next heartbeat, he vanished and reappeared above the fleeing dragon, poised to pounce. His form shimmered and expanded as he channeled raw teleportation magic, ready to land the blow that would decide this day's fate. Giant magic! With a roar that shook the battlefield, Lucian's form swelled until he stood 30 meters tall. In one fluid motion, he dove from the sky and landed astride the demon dragon's sinuous neck. Crackling blue-white lightning danced across his skin, infusing his muscles with raw power. Drawing his hands back, he slammed them together like a hammer against the creature's skull, driving its head into the scorched earth. The great dragon Glorung reeled, stunned by the aerial assault. The beast's massive neck rippled as it dragged its head free and whipped it from side to side, preparing to unleash a gout of flame at its rider. Anticipating the attack, Lucian clamped his iron grip around Glorung's scales, holding its head pinned to the ground. He knew the dragon's magic resistance rivaled even Sauron's, so any direct spellcasting would likely bounce harmlessly off its hide. Instead, he channeled his giant magician's ley line current into his own physical strength, opting for brutal close-quarters combat. Even so, Lucian was painfully aware of the scale difference. Glorung stretched over 200 meters from snout to tail. He couldn't hope to overpower the dragon on his own. But that wasn't his role here. He was the support, buying precious seconds for the allied mages and knights to strike, and he was not alone. For now, all he had to do was hold fast, keep the dragon's head down, and pray his companions could turn the tide before Glorung shook him loose. The 3 elven princes formed a tight semicircle around the dragon, their holy swords gleaming in the torchlight. Their singular mission was to keep the beast under physical restraint. No sorcery this time, unlike when Sauron had slipped free of every enchantment they laid. Tonight, the only barrier between freedom and capture was steel and elven muscle. The dragon's great head whipped around, scales clinking like armor. Flames curled from its nostrils. "Damn human!" it thundered, voice echoing off the cliff walls. Atop its neck, Lucian clung to a ridge of spines, refusing to be thrown. But when the 3 princes surged forward, the dragon snorted in annoyance and bolted, Lucian still locked to his back. "Think you can run?" Lucian called out. With a nimble flip, he vaulted from the dragon's broad shoulder to solid ground. Instantly, he seized the beast's massive lower jaw, yanking its flaming maw shut. He wrapped his legs around its thick neck, pinning its head to the earth. "For the glory of the elves," he cried. In that same heartbeat, the princes raised their swords and swung. Silver-edged blades arced down toward the dragon's exposed throat. Lucian's body shimmered, his temporary, smaller form dissolving, and he snapped back to full human height, vaulting clear of the coming spray. A geyser of molten blood erupted from the dragon's wound, poisonous ichor that hissed on the stone floor. Lucian landed lightly on his feet as the three princes drove their holy steel deep into the beast's sinewy neck. The dragon roared in pain and fury, but the elves held fast, their blades glowing with sacred light. In a single, desperate moment, they tamed the terror of legend and claimed victory over steel alone. Lucian stood atop the shattered summit, his three sacred swords raised high. One by one, they ignited with a brilliant golden radiance, their beams swirling and coalescing until they became a single, colossal blade of pure light. With a silent hum of divine power, that gleaming greatsword descended, severing the dragon's head in a single, flawless stroke. In less than 24 hours after its birth, Morgoth's first dragon lay fallen, its brief reign ended by Lucian's unwavering resolve. Chapter 265, The Elves' Life Magic, Update 1. Lucian's voice thundered over the battlefield. "The demon dragon is dead. Everyone, press the attack." With a burst of sheer force, he grew to towering height, hefted Glaurung's severed head in one gauntleted hand, and hurled it into the ranks of the orc host. In a blink, he apparated back to the city wall alongside the three elven princes, chanting the words of a city-shaking amplification spell. From his vantage point, the grisly trophy of the dragon's demise crashed among the orcs below. Chaos erupted. The Balrog reeled, its fiery eyes widening in disbelief. Orcs broke ranks, shrieking in terror. Seeing their foes falter, the elves and humans roared in unison, surging forward along the ramparts to counterattack. Lucian didn't hesitate. With a mighty bound, he leapt straight into the heart of the orc battalion. His giant form absorbed their crude steel and jagged blades without faltering. Then he raised both hands and unleashed his plasma railgun. Blue-white arcs of superheated plasma sizzled into existence, sweeping in a vast, spinning arc that cleaved through armor, bone, and earth alike. The hillside beneath them split apart, orc and goblin alike disintegrated under the searing blast. Against such power, even Sauron's lesser allies could do nothing but scatter or succumb. Within moments, the tide of battle irrevocably shifted. Lucian's defiant roar echoed over the carnage, rallying every elf and human who still drew breath. The orcish horde collapsed into panic and retreat, crushed beneath the unstoppable force of life magic and the indomitable will of a single, towering hero. Lucian let the last echoes of the plasma cannon's blast fade, then leaned forward, breathing hard as his inner reserves began to regenerate. Behind him, a golden sigil materialized in midair, its runes spinning outward in perfect symmetry. "Light magic, rain of light," he intoned. Instantly, a storm of gleaming arrows rained down across the Orcish ranks encircling them. Dozens of green-skinned warriors fell in a single volley, their war cries cut short as they collapsed to the ground. At that same moment, the three elven princes, Kalin, Farrell, and Thalin, dove in tandem toward a towering Balrog that had broken through the lines. Kalin's blade flashed with frost, Farrell's bow sang a deadly twang, and Thalan's twin daggers struck mercilessly at the demon's joints. With a final, thunderous roar, the Balrog toppled over the bodies of its own minions. Seeing their champion fall, the remaining Balrogs turned and fled in panic. They valued their immortal lives far more than the disposable orcs, and the loss of their commander shattered their resolve completely. As the monstrous legions melted away toward Angban's gates, the Orcish warriors' morale crumbled. Their battle chant dissolved into shouts of terror, and they broke ranks, racing back to the Dark Fortress. Lucian rallied the human-elf coalition, fewer than 1,000 soldiers in all, and gave chase. The ground trembled under their pursuit, but by the time they reached the ruined elven fortress at the front lines, the enemy was already out of sight. Panting and bloodied, Lucian and the three princes halted atop the crumbling battlements, surveying the battlefield littered with fallen orcs and embers of Balrog fire. For now, the day was theirs, but the pyres on the horizon and the looming shadow of Angban served as grim reminders. This war was far from over. Lucian's voice caught on the wind as he peered toward the distant bastion of Angband, where thick black smoke curled against the gray sky. "Is this the power of Morgoth?" he murmured. He had stood in the presence of Sauron's might before, and that alone had shaken him. Yet this was something far darker and more profound. Morgoth had poured his essence into Arda itself, corrupting its very foundations. If what Lucian felt now was but a fraction of the Dard's wrath, then the Valar must have wielded unimaginable power to hold him at bay. Behind Lucian, the three princes, hands on battered spears, their once bright armor scorched by sorcery, surveyed the ruined ramparts. Crumbled battlements and shattered gates spoke of a fortress undone from within, its defenses turned to dust. All around lay the charred bodies of the Light Elves, the loyal guardians who had once held this stronghold. Unfortunately, Lucian continued, his gaze sweeping the devastation, every one of these fortresses, built to resist Morgoth's legions, lies in ruin. A mournful hush fell over the company. The princes remembered too well the day they celebrated victory here, when banners flew and trumpets sounded. Now only silence and ash remained. "Your Highnesses," Lucian said gently, but with steady resolve, "now is not the time for sorrow. Morgoth's shadow still stretches across this land, and it is up to us to drive it back." He stepped forward, drawing his sword. Though the day seemed lost, Lucian's voice rang clear. "Come, we still have a world to save." Lucian shook himself fully awake and spoke with urgency. "We have to alert the elves in the east at once." He paused, gathering his thoughts. When an elf dies, his soul journeys to Mandos's halls, where there's still hope of reunion someday. As for the ruined castle behind them, Lucian knew a restoration spell could mend its walls, but that could wait. Right now, their top priority was whether they could hold the eastern front. A messenger bowed and delivered the grim report. Aglon Pass has fallen. The entire eastern field is lost. Only the fortress under Maedhros' command managed to pull back. The rest of our forces retreated south. Worse still, the Fire Demon King's legions have broken through and are pouring into the continent's interior. The second and third princes exchanged troubled looks. They hadn't expected the eastern lines to collapse so swiftly. Though their families still bore the scars of old betrayals, 7 cousins who had turned against their kin, they knew blood and destiny bound them together against this common foe. The second prince cleared his throat. "Before we could even plan an assault on the central front, we received Maedhros' urgent dispatch from the east. He warns that the enemy struck there first, then will savage the center, and finally bear down on the western border." Silence fell over the council chamber as everyone digested the news. Lucian lifted his gaze, determination burning in his eyes. "Then we must move quickly. Inform the elves, rally what troops we can, and prepare every defense in the east. If we lose that line, nothing will stand between the Demon King and our heartlands." With that, the princes and their captains rose and hurried from the chamber. Lucian allowed himself one brief moment of hope. Perhaps the elves could still hold the eastern passes. If they did, there was still a chance to turn the tide, and as long as any light remained in this war, he would fight on. Unfortunately, the warning from the eastern front arrived too late. Before the princes could brace themselves, the demon dragon's legions shattered the forward fortress and stormed all the way to the gates of Elf City. "Well?" One of the commanders allowed himself a grim smile. "It's not the worst outcome. At least our second and third defensive lines are still standing. We've avoided a total collapse." Lucian listened as both princes, Prince Dao and his brother, filled him in on the grim details. At first, he sat silent, absorbing the news. Then he exhaled, a mixture of relief and resignation. Perfect defenses are a luxury rarely afforded in war. Even if the eastern wall had held, sending reinforcements that far would have been nearly impossible. The 3 princes and their elemental guard had just emerged from a brutal engagement. Exhausted and shaken, they were nowhere near combat ready and would need days of rest to recover their strength. Lucian himself felt the toll. Though his magical reserves were theoretically boundless, he had already pushed his power to the brink, channeling electric currents through his body again and again. Now, fatigue weighed on him as heavily as it did on the soldiers around him. Restored to her former glory. As soon as Lucian finished speaking, a soft glow radiated from his outstretched hands. The battered walls of the fortress, blackened by fire and cracked by siege, began to knit themselves back together. Chunks of stone levitated, realigned, and snapped neatly into place. Timber beams replaced themselves, and shattered battlements reformed as though time itself were reversing. Within moments, the once crumbling stronghold stood proud and unblemished, its towers piercing the sky just as they had in happier days. The gathered elves and human warriors watched in awe. Only a short while ago, this fortress had been a smoldering ruin following the Orcish onslaught. Though the horde had been driven back to Angband, none dared believe such a swift return was impossible. Morgoth's forces were cunning and relentless. Should they strike again, a restored citadel might withstand the assault. Hence, it was imperative to repair every breach and station a garrison to defend this strategic bulwark. No sooner had Lucian's repair spell subsided than a gentle chorus rose up among the light elves. Kneeling, they laid their palms against the scorched earth, their voices weaving a new enchantment. Wherever their hands touched, charred soil sprouted verdant shoots. Coal-black trunks brightened to bark of emerald and gold as felled trees resurrected themselves, leaves unfurling in a riot of green. Burnt blossoms reappeared, petals shimmering with dew. Then, the elves produced small pouches brimming with seeds, apples, figs, pomegranates, and more. With a few whispered words, they coaxed the seeds into sprouting at astonishing speed. Saplings shot upward, blossoming and bearing fruit in the space of breaths. Ripe apples hung from branches heavy with promise. Figs swelled purple and sweet. The sight was so miraculous that some of the soldiers dared pluck a piece and taste it on the spot. Juicy and cool, the fruit was more than mere sustenance. It was hope reborn. Lucian allowed himself a satisfied smile. Magic might heal stone and wood, but together with his elven allies, he'd shown that even the scars of war on the land could be mended. As banners fluttered from the towers and the orchard's bounty spread around them, the assembled forces set about their new duty, holding this keep against whatever darkness might next descend. In that moment, united under banner and blessing, they felt certain they could. This is life magic. In that moment, Lucian finally understood why the elven cities were so breathtaking. Encircled by blossoms, vines, and towering trees, they never needed to toil in the fields as humans did. Everything here felt effortlessly graceful and abundant. It seems the elves command far more magic than I suspected, he mused. Yet few of their spells are geared toward offense, and those that are exist more to support archery and swordplay than to kill outright. A surge of anticipation welled up in him. This life magic was completely foreign to the system he'd studied so far. If he could crack the eastern defense line just enough for the elves to seize the initiative, he could buy time to delve deeper into their arcane secrets. With that plan in mind, he left the bulk of the mixed human-elf garrison to rest in the frontline fortress. Lucian, Bergolas, Barahir, and the three princes led a small escort back to the elven capital. Meanwhile, reinforcements under the eldest prince, fresh from the canyon, were already pouring in. Together, the heirs set about reorganizing their defenses, preparing for whatever came next. Bergolas and Barahir returned to the human town and safely evacuated every inhabitant to the elven city. Once the last villagers were across the border, Lucian stepped forward to examine the dragon's fallen body. Chapter 266, Dragon Crystal Refinement and Fusion, Second Update. Reaffixing the dragon's severed head to its body, Lucian began tracing an enormous magic circle around the corpse. Refining a dragon crystal requires nothing more than the dragon's body. No additional reagents are needed. By activating a specialized glyph, one can compress every drop of the dragon's essence into a single crystal, which may then be implanted into the user. Some practitioners choose to process the dragon's heart separately, yielding two smaller crystals, one heart crystal and one body crystal, but these never match the potency of a crystal forged from the intact corpse. Lucian had no intention of settling for second best. He wanted one flawless, all-encompassing dragon crystal. Let's begin. With the circle complete, Lucian placed both hands on its glowing lines and poured in his mana. The runes flared to life, bathing the dragon's form in brilliant light. Under that radiance, the once massive body began to tremble, its enormous wings folding in as the flesh and bone contracted inward. Inch by inch, the dragon's form collapsed upon itself, the magic circle drawing every ounce of its draconic power into a single, burgeoning crystal at its center. About an hour later, the magic circle detonated in a brilliant burst, and when the glow faded, a crimson dragon crystal, no larger than a palm, lay at its center. Lucian scooped it up, feeling raw fire magic pulse within its facets. "It's done," he whispered, a triumphant smile tugging at his lips. He wasted no time. Murmuring the fusion incantation, Lucian pressed the warm crystal to his chest, directly over his heart. A jagged pain tore through him as the gem liquefied and seeped into his body like molten water, bonding with his core and infusing his magic with draconic power. When the last fragment dissolved, his body convulsed and then settled, utterly transformed. Every sinew and fiber seemed reforged. His muscles swelled with new density, his reflexes sharpened, his endurance soared. What had already been a physique beyond ordinary human limits now surpassed anything he'd ever imagined. His strength, speed, and stamina easily tripled. His defense rose just as dramatically. Where once a bullet might pierce his skin and draw a trickle of blood, now it would barely graze him. Only his magical defenses remained virtually non-existent, a vulnerability he would address in due course. Lucian flexed his limbs experimentally, marveling at the absence of any lingering arcane backlash. Before the dragon crystal's integration, he'd still needed to maintain a constant magic shield. Otherwise spells, arcane or mundane, would strike him just as they would any wizard or ordinary person. At best, he could shatter incoming magic through sheer force of will and strength of sorcery. But now, thanks to the crystal's fusion, he'd absorbed a portion of the magic dragon's own physiology. Along with its raw power, he'd inherited formidable physical and magical resistance. Even without consciously deploying a protective ward, mundane blows and spellwork alike would either glance harmlessly off him or be drastically weakened. Simply put, his newfound durability made this transformation more than worth the price. No wonder Morgoth had called his creation the first ancestor dragon. Satisfied, Lucian opened his jaws and expelled a gout of inky black flame. There was no need for incantations or hand gestures. The fire issued forth as naturally as a snake's venom. He grinned at the sizzling furrows scorched into the clearing before him. This was freedom, his body now a human-shaped dragon, capable of summoning that same raw, destructive breath that Glaurung had once wielded. It wasn't as vast or relentless as the ancient worms, but it was more than enough to prove just how much power he truly possessed. But that hardly matters. When you're a human dragon slayer, you can't spit out draconic infernos the size of a volcano. Of course, your mouth fire will be weaker than a real dragon's breath. If Lucian wanted more power, he could imply master a formal dragon slayer spell, just like the ones taught at Fairy Tale, and boost his flame that way. In fact, he could even copy Natsu's moves and apply them directly to his own magic, saving himself a lot of hassle. Spitting fire from your lungs also has its own advantages over casting it as a spell. A jet of flame from your mouth is faster, more precise, and far more likely to catch an opponent off guard. Think of it like throwing a throwing knife by hand. When you hurl it, they see it coming and dodge, but a sudden burst of flame at point-blank range, there's almost no time to react. In close combat, a surprise fire bite could be devastating. Lucian knew he'd need that element of surprise in future fights. He could launch a stealth attack, then finish with a mouthful of flame, an unexpectedly effective tactic. The next step is the core of Dragon Slayer magic, he reminded himself. He held out his hand, summoned a small flicker of fire, and then inhaled it sharply back into his lungs, preparing for what came next. Lucian stared at the dancing flames before him, recalling the single greatest advantage of a dragon slayer over an ordinary fire mage, the power to consume any flame an opponent conjures, turning their magic into his own and growing stronger with each bite. When matched against another fire user, a dragon slayer is virtually unbeatable, unless the gap in strength is overwhelming. So why wasn't it working? He had tried again and again to absorb the fiery blaze, just as Natsu did, but nothing happened. At first, Lucian convinced himself it was because the flames weren't his own magic, so he even borrowed a torch from one of the elven soldiers. But still, no reaction. Could it be that dragons from different worlds offered different gifts? Perhaps Glorung, the ancient magic dragon who had taught Lucian, simply lacked the ability to devour elemental energy the way fairy tales dragons did. It wasn't all bad news. In experimenting with his newfound limitation, Lucian discovered a peculiar upside. The crippling disorientation that plagued fairy tales' dragon slayers during teleportation. Dragon sickness, they called it, seemed to have no effect on him. He may not gain strength by eating borrowed fire, but at least he could travel without paying that steep price. And in a world filled with surprises, he knew he'd need every advantage he could get. Lucian frowned as he reviewed their progress. We still need to acquire an authentic dragon crystal from the fairy tale world. He thought back to a familiar proverb: oranges grown south of the Wye River taste sweet, while those from the north turn bitter. Just as climate and soil yield vastly different fruit, each world's dragons, subject to their own environments, produce crystals of unique strength. It made perfect sense that the refined dragon crystals would vary in power from realm to realm. In any case, the upgrade was undeniably beneficial. Lucian's physique had been augmented far beyond human limits, boosting his resilience and survivability. When he channeled Titan magic and infused his strikes with electric charge, his melee prowess surged. Now, he could tower 30 meters tall, not as colossal as the guild president's 100-meter transformation, but thanks to his rock-solid base form, combined with the electrical stimulus, Lucian's actual combat effectiveness might well surpass that of his larger rival. The same enhancements rippled through Marvel's core essence and every clone across the multiverse, elevating their abilities in tandem. Though Lucian felt a slight sting of regret, for no refinement was ever entirely flawless, the tremendous gains in strength and endurance outweighed any lingering imperfections. He just had to find that genuine fairy tale dragon crystal next. One more thing. Lucian's control over fire magic has grown remarkably. The Fiery Curse, a dangerous, all-consuming black spell that once ran wild, leaving destruction in its wake, is now completely under his command. Should he go to war with Morgoth and mount an assault on Anne, G-Band, his plan is simple. Every day he'll unleash colossal firestorms to incinerate Morgoth's orc legions, clearing the way for the final showdown against Morgoth himself and his Balrog. With the dragon crystal matter settled, Lucian returned to the elf city. There, in the short time he'd been away, the light elves had already used their life magic to restore every scorched flower, shrub, and tree to its former glory. The city's gardens now bloomed as lush and vibrant as ever, a living testament to their art and Lucian's triumphant mastery of flame. Chapter 267, The Round Table Meeting. As Lucian strode along the ivory-paved avenues of the elf city, every elf he passed came to an immediate halt and saluted. These light elves, veterans of the Canyon War or defenders during the siege, had witnessed Lucian's courage with their own eyes. Many owed their lives to him. In their culture, only royalty merited such honor. Yet here was Lucian, the sole human granted the same deference. Turning away from their respectful bows, Lucian continued toward the great meeting hall. Only moments before, he had been deep in his workshop, meticulously refining a cache of dragon crystals. An attendant had intercepted him. The 3 elven princes requested his presence at once. "Apologies for my tardiness," Lucian said, slipping through the carved doors of the hall. Inside, he found the princes already assembled around a massive oaken table. Beside them stood Bragolus and Barahir, 2 of the city's most seasoned commanders, and there was a 6th elf, taller even than the 3 princes combined, whose presence seemed to radiate power. Prince Elaris rose and waved a hand in dismissal. "You're just in time, Lucian. We haven't begun." A hush fell over the chamber as Lucian took his seat. Before them lay the map of the Western Territories, soon to be the stage for the next great conflict. The princes exchanged solemn glances. Bragolus tapped his gauntleted fingers, and Barahir stared intently at the sprawling topography. The towering stranger remained silent, his folded arms casting a cool shadow over the others. Lucian sensed a vast energy coiled within him, an aura that outmatched even the combined might of the 3 royal heirs. Lucian took a steadying breath. The fate of elf and human alike would be decided here. And though he was no prince, he would speak freely and ensure that every life at this table and beyond would be defended. "Lucian, may I present my cousin," said Prince Finrod with a warm smile. He gestured toward a tall elf whose dark hair glinted like starlight. "This is Fingon the Brave, soon to be High King of the Noldor." Fingon inclined his head in greeting. "It's an honor." At once, Lucian recognized the name and stature of the elf before him. Fingon was the renowned son of Fingolfin, the hero who defied Morgoth himself. When Fëanor had burned the ships at Eldamar and abandoned the houses of his younger brothers to pursue vengeance, his eldest son Maedhros had inherited the kingship of the Noldor. Yet Morgoth's cunning swore that the Silmarils would only be freed in exchange for Maedhros's oath. And then the Dark Lord ensnared him, chained him by the wrist to a sheer cliff at Thangorodrim, and left him to endure 30 years of torment. Fëanor's 6 younger sons dared not challenge Morgoth's might, and neither the houses of Fingolfin nor of Finrod acted, still smarting from the ship's burning. But Fingon, bound by the friendship he had shared with Maedhros in Valinor, slipped alone into the depths of Angband. There, against all odds, he shattered the chains and carried his king to safety. Now, standing before Lucian, Fingon bore the quiet confidence of one who had stared death in the face and lived. As Finrod looked on with pride, Lucian felt the weight of history settle around them. A tale of betrayal, suffering, and the single courageous heart that set it all right. To honor Fingon for saving his life, Maedhros granted the high kingship of the Noldor to Fingolfin, Fingon's father, despite fierce objections from his 6 younger brothers. Years later, Fingolfin fell in a duel with Morgoth, and Fingon ascended the throne. As High King, he united elves and men alike, repelling Morgoth's armies time and again. At last, however, he was surrounded by swarms of Balrogs and orcs under the fearsome Balrog king, and succumbed to exhaustion in the heart of battle. Finrod turned to the young man beside him. "This is Lucian," he announced, voice warm with gratitude. "Without his courage and skill, I fear Lady Galadriel might have been the only one left of our company." Fingon regarded Lucian with deep appreciation. "Lucian, on behalf of all the Noldor, I thank you. We will never forget your kindness." Lucian inclined his head, memories stirring of a darker time, when his uncle Fëanor had set their ships ablaze. It was Fingolfin who had guided him and their cousins across the frozen death glaciers of the northwest, braving every peril to bring them safely into Middle-earth. The 2 Noldor houses now stood in firm fellowship, true siblings in every sense, united by the same grandfather and grandmother. Fëanor, by contrast, shared only their grandfather. His own mother had died soon after his birth, and he and his 2 brothers were, in fact, half-siblings. Lucian had intervened decisively to save Prince Finrod's kin, treating them as family, and then reinforced the central defense line so that Morgoth's forces could not strike the western flank. Such deeds were a great boon to all elves. Yet Lucian, ever humble, did not immediately call in a favor for some elvish enchantment. He already had another plan in mind. After the customary expressions of gratitude, the counselors took their seats around the round table to discuss the next course of action. Lucian remained silent. He was not a seasoned war planner. His earlier contributions had come only from hindsight, knowledge of events that, thanks to his own interference, now unfolded along an entirely new path. His old experience, he realized, no longer applied. About 2 hours later, the council reached a unanimous decision. They would not attempt to send reinforcements to the eastern front. The line there had already collapsed. Morgoth's legions were pouring into the central continent. The 6 princes had fallen back to the south, and the eldest prince was holed up behind the castle walls. Any relief force sent east now would only be cut to pieces by the Dark Host swarming out of Angband and across Middle-earth. Worse still, such a move would leave the central and western defenses exposed to a fresh Morgoth offensive. Instead, they resolved to strengthen the middle and western fronts against the inevitable next strike. Finrod would return home immediately to muster every elf able to bear arms and fortify the cities of his 2nd and 3rd brothers. Bergolas and Barahir set out to gather the scattered human refugees and escort them into the safety of the nearest elven strongholds. In this way, they hoped to shore up their defenses and prepare for whatever Morgoth might unleash next. At the dawn of the First Age, men first appeared in the easternmost reaches of Middle-earth. 3 tribes, those descended from the House of Beor, the Haladin, and the House of Hador, soon pressed westward. Though the House of Beor was far smaller than its sister tribes, all three kept in close contact. By settling within supporting distance of one another, they formed a defensive line strong enough that even Morgoth's combined forces from the west and the central lands dared not break it. Meanwhile, Fingon prepared to visit Gondolin, the secret kingdom his brother Turgon had founded in a hidden valley beside a great canyon. His aim was to secure an elven host to garrison the frontier. Turgon, ever driven by wanderlust, had first traveled along the river Sirion when Ulmo, the Lord of Waters, came to him in vision. There, inspired by the sea god, he raised the walls of Gondolin in near-total secrecy. Whether by Ulmo's blessing or by Turgon's own genius, the city's population swelled in only a few centuries to rival the realm of their sire, Fingolfin. Lucian studied the reports from Gondolin with a keen eye. Their garrison was more than sufficient to hold the canyon, and with Fingolfin, their most formidable warrior, posted on the western approach, that flank was all but sealed against attack. Then there was the more urgent danger, the Fire Lord's armies, which had poured into the heart of Middle-earth, leaving devastation in their wake. In a voice ringing with resolve, Finrod announced that he would journey to the realm of the Grey Elves to beseech King Thingol for aid in Krur, ushering this fiery host. Why, the others wondered, could Finrod presume to speak so boldly to Thingol? The answer lay in blood ties. Finrod's branch of the family was, in fact, closely related to the House of the Grey Elves, enough kinship to secure an audience, and perhaps even an alliance, against the Fire Lord's onslaught. Chapter 268, Middle-earth, Hogwarts Academy, Second Update. When the elves began their great westward journey, King Thingol chose to remain in Middle-earth. He had fallen deeply in love with Maya Melian, forest guardian of that ancient land, and together they founded the realm of the Grey Elves in Doriath. Meanwhile, Thingol's younger brother, Awen, accepted the summons of the Valar and led the greater part of their people across the sea to Valinor. There, on the shores of the Blessed Realm, these sea elves established a new kingdom in the land of Aokalandi. Thus, though the Grey Elves and the Sea Elves settled in different worlds, they were of one blood. Their kings were brothers, and their clans shared a common heritage. That bond grew even closer when the third prince of the exiled Noldor, returning from the rebel host, married the eldest daughter of the Sea Elf king. From this union were born Finrod, Angrod, Agenor, and the fair Galadriel. Since their mother was Thingol's niece, these children were in fact his own grandnephews and grandniece. Years later, when the Noldor at last made their way back to Middle-earth, Thingol greeted them with joy and generosity. He held a sumptuous feast in his forest court, inviting every lord of the Noldor to dine beneath his towering Malorn trees. Above all, he honored his kinsfolk, Finrod, Angrod, Agenor, and Galadriel, whose return to Middle-earth bound the Grey Elves and the Noldor in renewed friendship. Yet beneath the convivial laughter and shining cups, a new chapter of conflict was stirring. Old rivalries between the returning Noldor and the elders of Doriath whispered through the halls. The proud sons and daughters of the Noldor, hardened by exile, found both welcome and wariness in equal measure. And so, as celebration gave way to council, the fate of Middle-earth's kingdoms hung in a delicate balance between alliance and discord. Lucian paced the marble floor of the council chamber, his jaw set with determination. "We must re-establish contact with the elves," he urged at the meeting's opening. But before he could press the point, memories of old wounds tugged at him. The night he learned that Fëanor's kin had slain his younger brother and slaughtered nearly all the sea elves. In his fury, he had driven every member of Fëanor's house from the Grey Elven realm, swearing thereafter never to aid them in reclaiming the Silmarils. Yet Lucian had made one important exception. He continued to welcome the kindred of Finarfin, Fingolfin's line, and especially Finrod's brothers and sisters, who had no part in that dreadful massacre. Among them was Galadriel, who now spent most of her days in the Grey Elven kingdom. Under Maya Melian's patient guidance, she delved into lore and magic, her wisdom growing with every lesson. Now, however, immediate peril eclipsed old feuds. The eastern defense line had shattered under the Balrog's assault, and Morgoth's armies spilled across the interior of the continent. What had begun as a personal vendetta for Fëanor's followers had become a battle for survival, for every living creature under the sky. Finrod, ever hopeful, believed that King Thingol would muster his forces and advance to blunt the enemy's advance. Just as the council seemed to draw to a close, Lucian lifted his head. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to him. "I have another proposal," he said quietly, yet with authority. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle before he continued. "Morgoth does not merely rely on Balrogs. He forges new terrors with every breath of his malice. If we are to stand any chance, we must strike at the heart of his power and cut off the very source from which these abominations spring." Lucian leaned forward, his gaze steady as he addressed the council. "If Morgoth can spawn even a single dragon, then in time he could amass an entire brood, or worse, unleash other, more dreadful abominations. With only a defensive line, we might hold him at bay for a century, but we have no guarantee of standing firm for 1,000 or 10,000 years. Fie, Ngon frowned. "Do you propose an all-out assault on Angband itself?" Lucian shook his head. "Not yet. Angband is suffused with Morgoth's dread power. Black smoke and poisonous mists choke the air. No elf short of our greatest champions could last long within those walls. If we strike now, most of our host would fall before the battle even begins." A murmur rippled through the hall. Why, they wondered, had the elves never tried to storm Angband in the first place? The answer lay in a cruel enchantment. Any ordinary light elf who dared enter Morgoth's realm found his strength sapped almost to nothing, utterly unable to contend with the Dark Lord. In the same way, the orcs that ventured beyond Angband would shrivel in the sun and moonlight, some even perishing outright at the first touch of silver rays. Still, Lucian's proposal shifted slightly. "No," he said, "I do not believe an immediate attack on Angband is feasible. What I suggest is that we turn our efforts to forging a true alliance between elves and men, bolstering our armies, training new champions, and sharing our arcane lore, so that one day we may strike Morgoth with overwhelming force." He smiled confidently, but the faces around him remained skeptical. Lucian knew convincing these leaders would be his greatest challenge yet. Lucian watched the assembled princes and captains in the great elven council chamber. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly over the hushed crowd. "Can we raise the power of elves and men together so that one day we might march on Angband itself?" he asked. Finrod, standing at Lucian's side, inclined his head in admiration. "Your magic is truly formidable," he replied. "Were it not for your spells, Morgoth's hordes would have swept over us long ago." Lucian bowed slightly. His magic might falter against titans like Sauron or the dragons of the north, but against common orcs it proved devastatingly efficient. Sweeping arcs of arcane fire, wards that struck dozens at once, and adaptive wards that repelled every blow. Even if all the elf princes combined their might, they could never match the sheer battlefield coverage of Lucian's enchantments. "But imagine if every elf and every man could wield that power," Lucian went on. "Then our armies, united and strengthened, would at last be able to carry the war to Angband's gates." He stood and let his eyes sweep the assembly. "My proposal is simple. We build an academy here, in this city that lies at the heart of our alliance. Elf masters would teach the arts of elven lore and magic, while human warriors share our battle tactics, archery, and engineering. All who swear to defend Middle-earth, elves, men, and even our dwarfkin, will come to learn, to train, and to grow stronger together." A murmur rose among the nobles. The promise of shared knowledge, of combined strength, stirred their hearts. Finrod stepped forward, his silver eyes bright. "Let it be so," he declared. "We will found this Academy of Unity. May it stand as the bulwark against Morgoth's darkness and the forge of our triumph." Lucian leaned forward, eyes bright with conviction. "By teaching both humans and elves to wield magic alongside their bows and blades," he said, "we'll forge a force Morgoth can no longer withstand. His army will cease to be a threat." His proposal rested on two fundamentals. First, he genuinely wanted to strengthen the Free Peoples. The Light Elves already possessed remarkable magical talent and an uncanny gift for study. If they mastered Lucian's arcane techniques, their warriors could unleash arrows and swords in perfect harmony with powerful spells. As for humans, many of their mages currently hurl incantations from the rear, separated from the frontline fighters. Lucian's teaching would allow human spellcasters to blend devastating magic into close combat, giant wards to shield allies, thunderous blasts to shatter enemy ranks, and enchanting barriers to turn the tide in the thick of battle. Second, a united elven-human army, each fighter adept in both steel and sorcery, would pose a far greater threat to Angband than either race alone. Morgoth's legions, no matter how vast, would falter against soldiers who could strike with sword, arrow, and spell in seamless coordination. With their newfound prowess, Lucian believed the Free Peoples could march on Angband itself, confront Morgoth, and deliver the final blow to his reign of darkness. In his mind, there was no greater achievement. By spreading his magical knowledge to elves and humans, he would not only free Middle-earth from shadow, but earn his place among the Valar in Valinor. That shining promise lay just beyond the horizon, within reach, if only he could see his plan carried through to victory. Lucian paused for breath and continued. And consider this. Once the Academy is founded, we'll draw the greatest elven masters to our halls. Galadriel, destined to be queen, Luthien, whose voice once bent even Morgoth's will, and many more. No longer would I need to trek through every elven realm in search of teachers. Instead, I'd study under them all in one place, more direct, more efficient. As Lucian painted the picture of their future, the young elven princes leaned forward, eyes bright. They saw it all. Elves and humans fighting side by side, arrows of radiant magic streaking across the sky to scatter Orcish ranks in an instant, warriors swollen to giant size, toppling Angband's towers with a single blow. Of course, Lucian knew nothing about battlefield tactics. Troop deployments, supply lines, siegecraft were all beyond him. He'd never been a military strategist in this life or the last. But he was unrivaled at what his old coworkers mockingly called cake painting, promising bright tomorrows to cheer people on. In his previous career, his boss roasted him daily for it, and in another life, in the pages of his Harry Potter diary, he'd spun illusionary feasts for Voldemort himself. Fortunately, the elves and humans here were still innocent enough to be swept away by his grand visions. And that, Lucian thought with a secret smile, was exactly how you lay the first stone of a legacy. The assembled lords and ladies raised their hands in unison, voices echoing through the hall. We must begin preparations at once. Elves and humans alike were far from foolish. In fact, their sharp minds had long made them formidable. Yet even the cleverest can be led astray, as the age-old tale of Sauron's deception during the War of the Ring had proven. Lucian's plan, however, was no trick. If they succeeded, the result would surpass any of their greatest imaginings. Finrod leaned forward, excitement shining in his eyes. Lucian, he said, this was your suggestion. You alone should name our new institution. Lucian allowed a moment's silence to settle over the council, the flicker of torchlight dancing on his thoughtful face. Then, with quiet authority, he spoke. Very well. Let it be called Hogwarts College of Middle-earth. A ripple of awed approval swept through the chamber. Thus, a dream born of both ancient lore and fresh ambition took its first fateful step toward reality. Chapter 269, Animagus Transformation, Third Update. Meanwhile, at the real Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Lucian's duplicate was hard at work refining his magical skills. In Professor McGonagall's second-year Transfiguration class, she was exploring the intricate theory behind human body transformations, material that went well beyond the basic textbook. Lucian may have already mastered the standard curriculum and practiced all the requisite spells to the proficiency of an adult wizard, but he understood that true expertise depended on more than mere memorization. As McGonagall lectured, illustrating how subtle changes in muscle structure and bone alignment affected a transformation's stability, he leaned forward in his seat, eager to absorb every nuance. Where textbooks offered only the bare essentials, her in-class discussions drew on decades of experience, revealing pitfalls, exceptions, and advanced control techniques. Lucian knew that if he wanted not just to match the skills of seasoned wizards, but to surpass them and eventually integrate Hogwarts magic into the arcane systems of other worlds, he needed a rock-solid foundation. Skipping class simply because he already knew the basics was out of the question. Fortunately, his secret time converter allowed him to rewind after the lesson, granting extra hours each day to practice experimental spells or study foreign magical doctrines. That way, fulfilling Hogwarts requirements and pursuing his own ambitions never came into conflict. And with that balance, Lucian was more determined than ever to master the art of animagus transformation. Professor McGonagall paced slowly in front of the packed Transfiguration classroom, the chalk dust swirling around her as she wrote a title on the board: Human Body Transfiguration, Risks and Restrictions. She turned to face her students, her stern gaze sweeping the room. Transfiguring a human body is by far the most difficult and dangerous discipline in our subject, she began, voice clear and measured. A human mind instinctively resists alteration. That resistance makes the transformation process agonizingly complex and risky. Until you possess the requisite skill and magical power, you must never attempt to transfigure another human being, and you certainly must not experiment on yourself. Lucian, seated toward the middle of the second row, felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He watched Professor McGonagall's sharp profile against the bright windows, every word sinking in with growing unease. The professor continued, "Let us consider an infamous example from ancient Greece. Circe, the sorceress of Aeaea. She was renowned for her mastery of human transfiguration, especially her porcine conversion spell. Stray sailors who washed ashore under her care found themselves abruptly transformed into swine. Once the spell took hold, their human consciousness slipped away, replaced entirely by the pig's instincts, and because Circe never lifted the enchantment, none of her victims ever returned to their true forms." A collective shiver rippled through the students. The very idea of losing one's mind to a transformation spell was enough to make hands tremble around Lucian. "Such practices are strictly forbidden at Hogwarts," Professor McGonagall went on, her tone hardening. "Any witch or wizard found guilty of human transfiguration will face severe consequences. In the most serious cases, offenders are sent to Azkaban, guarded by Dementors no less." At the mention of Azkaban, Lucian's breath caught. Dementors, cold, hollow creatures that sucked the warmth from their victims. He glanced at his classmates. Some had gone rigid, others covered their mouths, dreading the thought of those prison cells. Professor McGonagall closed her textbook with a decisive snap. "That concludes today's lesson. Remember, mastery of transfiguration demands respect for its power. Never underestimate the dangers, and always practice within the safety of your ability." As the students rose to gather their things, Lucian couldn't shake the icy dread creeping through his veins. Human transfiguration, once a fascinating theoretical subject, suddenly felt all too real, and infinitely more perilous than he had ever imagined. At the start of term, they'd encountered Dementors on the Hogwarts Express and felt all too keenly the horror of those soul-sucking sentries. Even now, scores of the foul creatures still prowled the school's entrances and exits. At the very thought, every student in Professor McGonagall's Transfiguration class found themselves stealing glances at Lucian. He sat rigidly at his desk, utterly focused on the lesson, as undaunted by Dementors as he had been the day he drove them off single-handedly. "Professor," ventured a first-year, raising his hand timidly, "is turning yourself into an animal, like the cat you just showed us, actually the same as becoming your own animagus?" Professor McGonagall smiled kindly and nodded. "Precisely. What you observed is called animagus transfiguration, and it's covered in your fifth-year textbooks. However, I do not recommend you try it on your own. The procedure is fiendishly intricate. One miscalculation, and you could remain trapped in animal form forever. Many gifted witches and wizards have spent years perfecting it, only to fail at the final step and give up in frustration." A second-year boy leaned forward, curiosity shining in his eyes. "Why is it so complicated? Is it because the incantation is extremely long? I ask because I didn't hear any spell when you changed into the cat." Professor McGonagall's eyes twinkled. "Ah, an excellent question. The complexity of animagus transfiguration comes not from the length of the words, but from the precision of your magical intention. Simply reciting an incantation won't do. Your entire mind, will, and wand movement must harmonize perfectly with the animal form you wish to assume. Even the smallest hesitation or stray thought can cause the transformation to fail, or worse, leave you stuck in mid-change. Is that clear?" Murmurs of awe and apprehension rippled through the classroom. Lucian continued to stare at the professor, unperturbed, as if already calculating how he might master this legendary magic himself. Lucian leaned forward, curiosity flickering in his eyes. Mag hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "Since you're interested, I'll give you a quick overview. The animagus transformation spell itself isn't the hard part. It's the preparation that tests your resolve." She closed her heavy textbook and set it aside. First, for a full lunar cycle, from one full moon to the next, you must keep a single mandrake leaf tucked inside your cheek. You cannot swallow it or remove it. If it leaves your mouth, the process resets and you start again. At the next full moon, carefully retrieve the leaf and place it in a small crystal vial filled with your own saliva. Expose the vial to the pure light of the moon. If even a single cloud drifts across the sky, you'll need a new leaf and must begin the cycle anew. Once your leaf has absorbed the moonlight, add one strand of your hair and exactly a silver teaspoon of dew collected at dawn from a place untouched by sunlight or human hands for 7 straight days. Finally, drop in the pupa of a hawk moth. Seal the vial and tuck it away in a dark, silent spot. Do not look at it or disturb it in any way until the first rumble of thunder. Lucian swallowed. He understood that mastering an animagus form demanded more patience and precision than almost any other enchantment in existence. Chapter 7. The Rite of Storm and Heart. Lucian studied the worn parchment, committing its precise instructions to memory. He knew there was no room for error. Third, while the storm gathered on the horizon, he was to perform a simple ritual at both sunrise and sunset. At each turning of the day, he must press the wand's tip lightly against his chest and recite the prescribed incantation in a clear, unwavering voice. Fourth, throughout this waiting period, the crystal vial at the ritual site must remain completely still and shielded from direct sunlight. Even a single ray could taint its contents and trigger uncontrollable mutations. He must repeat the incantation at dawn and dusk exactly as written, no lines omitted, no syllables altered, until he senses something extraordinary. The wand's tip, guided by unseen forces, will press itself firmly against his heart, and he will feel a second heartbeat within his own, sometimes pounding with fierce intensity, sometimes faint as a distant drum. Fifth, at the precise moment a bolt of lightning cleaves the sky, Lucian must rush to the vial's burial place. If every prior step has been carried out flawlessly, the earth will yield a blood-red potion inside the clay vessel. Sixth, potion in hand, he is to withdraw to a vast, secluded clearing, far from prying eyes and potential danger. There, once more pressing the wand to his heart, he must drink the crimson elixir in a single, steady draught while intoning the spell until its final syllable echoes away on the storm winds. Lucian rolled up the parchment, his heart pounding with equal parts dread and resolve. Dawn's first light was only hours away, and with it, the trial that would change him forever. Professor McGonagall's voice was calm but grave as she outlined the dangers of animagus transformation. "If everything goes correctly," she said, "you will endure intense pain and suddenly feel your heartbeat split into two. In that instant, the animal form you seek will flood your mind. You must remain absolutely steadfast. If your concentration falters, the spell will backfire. You'll lose your human self entirely, trapped forever as that creature. Many wizards have vanished this way, succumbing to animal instincts, or worse, falling prey to muggles who see them only as wild beasts." Lucian absorbed every word, a knot of apprehension tightening in his chest. He'd always thought mastering an animagus form was simply a matter of technique. Now he understood why so few witches and wizards ever succeeded. The process demanded not only magical skill, but steel-hard willpower, and quite frankly, a stroke of luck. One wrong move, and you could find yourself stranded in the animal world, forced to start from square one, if you survived at all. And that's only the beginning. McGonagall continued. "Before you even attempt the transformation, you must complete the leaf trial. You will hold these silver-edged leaves in your mouth for an entire month without speaking or breaking the seal. It seems simple, but remaining silent while this charm holds you is far more challenging than most anticipate. Many give up within days." Lucian glanced at the delicate leaves resting on the lectern. A month of voiceless solitude and relentless focus lay between him and becoming an animagus. He steeled himself, determination kindling in his eyes. Whatever it took, he would see this through. Many wizards balk at the animagus transformation, not only fearing failure but unwilling to expend so much energy and time on a single spell. Potter and Sirius had been extraordinarily fortunate, completing their animagus shifts in perfect unison. Lucian, however, felt none of their trepidation. Since fusing with the dragon crystal, he had sensed his magic stretching beyond ordinary limits, perhaps even enough to override the long-standing prohibition against taking on a truly magical form. Deep down, he believed he could become the demon dragon Glaurung itself. Obstacles that deterred lesser wizards barely registered on Lucian's radar. Containing mandrake leaves within his vessels was a trivial task. If his voice gave out during the transformation, he could simply switch to telepathic communication without missing a beat. Should rolling clouds obscure the moonlight, he would uncork his crystal phial and rise through the darkness until the silver beams kissed his skin. And if the heavens refused to weep, he would invoke ancient storm magics to summon thunder and rain at will. All that remained was the final ingredient no spell could conjure: unwavering resolve. With that, Lucian was certain his animagus rite would not only succeed, it would shatter every barrier standing between him and the form of Glaurung. Lucian's spiritual gifts let him bypass most magical wards without breaking a sweat. Compared to ordinary wizards, learning an animagus transformation posed little real challenge for him, though it demanded extra time, and there was no guarantee he'd emerge in full dragon form. He checked his pocket watch, then slipped back into the shadowed corridor. "Tonight," he whispered, "I'm risking a trip to the Mandrake greenhouse for that single leaf." Chapter 270, Introduction to Alchemy. By the time Transfiguration ended, it was already noon. As Lucian packed his notes, a fifth-year Slytherin witch fluttered up beside him. "Lucian," she asked, "want to join me for lunch in the Great Hall?" He offered her a polite smile. "Thanks, but I'm heading down to the dungeons. I want to ask Professor Snape a few questions about advanced charms." Over the past weeks, Lucian's reputation at Hogwarts had grown to the point that invitations like this had become routine. Teenage witches were quick to express their interest in a clever, confident wizard. In his previous life, he'd carried a few quiet crushes of his own, but never quite had the courage or the forwardness of these girls. He knew it was kinder to refuse outright than to lead someone on with half-hearted promises. "Good luck," the Slytherin witch said with a small bow, masking her disappointment as best she could. Lucian nodded and slipped away through the castle's winding corridors, determined to make the most of his time with Professor Snape. He had a feeling that mastering alchemy would require far more than just textbook study, and Snape was the perfect mentor to guide him through its darker, more intricate secrets. After being turned down, most girls eventually move on and find someone else. But every so often, you run into a thick-skinned witch who just won't take no for an answer. Tell her you've got errands to run, and she'll press on. What's keeping you busy? Next thing you know, she's trailing you through the halls, an outright stalker. That's when Professor Snape comes in handy. All Lucian has to do is mention that he's consulting Snape on a magical problem, and suddenly no one dares follow him. It isn't just Slytherins who fear the potions master. Students from every house quake at the mere whisper of his name. "Fine. Forget it," the witch spat, her confident grin vanishing in an instant. Just as Lucian expected, her expression turned ashen. She'd been scolded by Snape only yesterday for dumping the wrong ingredients into her cauldron, and the memory still left her hands shaking. Lucian's answer had carried down the corridor, and the other girls who had been edging closer, hoping to invite him to dinner, froze in their steps. With a few nervous glances at one another, they quickly backed off and disappeared around the corner. Lucian snapped shut the spellbook, slipped out of the classroom, and made his way to a quiet alcove. He needed a place where no one would see him, and where his past self certainly wouldn't be waiting, before activating the time turner. If anyone witnessed his sudden appearance, the shock alone could draw unwanted attention. Even worse, a face-to-face encounter with his earlier self might fracture the timeline, unleashing unpredictable and potentially dangerous ripples. Once he was sure he was alone, Lucian clicked the hourglass pendant 5 times. The air around him seemed to unspool, colors and shapes sliding backward in a dizzying blur. In the space of a heartbeat, he was hurled 5 hours into the past. Time magic never ceases to amaze me, he breathed, marveling at how vivid the reversal always felt. Although he'd navigated temporal loops countless times, each journey left him awestruck. Yet true mastery of time spells remained elusive. Lucian had even approached Dumbledore for guidance, only to discover that references to time magic were frustratingly sparse. Scattered notes here, a cryptic marginalia there, but no comprehensive theory. Even the wise headmaster admitted he'd largely fumbled his way along. In the end, Lucian knew he'd have to chart this temporal frontier on his own. Lucian stared at the empty pages of his notebook and wondered if there might be fragments of time magic hidden in other worlds. If he could gather and compare their theories, his own progress would accelerate, but finding those clues was easier said than done. In the Marvel Universe, for instance, the Time Stone granted its wielder control over the flow of hours, and the Ancient One stood unrivaled as its guardian. Still, Lucian had no intention of seeking her out. The Ancient One's web of secrets was vast, and the moment he drew too close, he risked losing whatever advantage he'd earned. Beyond her hovered Emperor Waishan and the cosmic entity Eternity, beings whose power lay far beyond anything he could currently conceive. He turned next to the world of the magician's apprentice. He scoured Merlin's grimoire and Morgana's lost codex, but found no reference to chronomancy. It was as if no one in that realm had ever even dreamed of bending time. In fairy tale, he unearthed only a fleeting mention. Time magic once existed as the lost magic called the Arc of Time. But by definition, lost magics have vanished entirely, leaving no instruction manuals behind. Finally, Lucian considered Academy City, where Shirley's expansive memory banks cataloged countless spells. He'd just begun cultivating relationships with the city's magicians, yet even Shirley had no record of time manipulation. For now, every avenue lay sealed. He closed his notebook with a sigh. If every known realm had shut its doors, perhaps he would have to blaze a new trail of his own. No references, no mentors, only trial, error, and the relentless ticking of the clock. Lucian stared at the index, wondering if among its 13,000 magically bound volumes there might be a treatise on time magic. In all his time in Middle-earth, he'd never heard Finrod claim any mastery over temporal spells, so for now he would set time magic aside and turn his full attention to alchemy. After all, every journey begins with a single step. Hogwarts offered no formal alchemy course, but that mattered little. The greatest alchemist at the school, second only to Nicholas Flamel himself, was Professor Albus Dumbledore. Renowned for his extraordinary skill in transfiguration and defense against the dark arts, Dumbledore's accomplishments extended far beyond those fields. He had mastered nearly every known branch of alchemy and even devised inventions of his own. Lucian thought in particular of the Deluminator, a deceptively simple-looking device that could snuff out Muggle lights. Muggle lamps weren't candles or oil lamps, but electrical bulbs, and yet when the Deluminator was activated, it didn't shatter filaments or break glass. Instead, it drew the light itself into its small brass chamber, leaving the room in perfect darkness. That single invention, Lucian realized, testified to the astonishing depth of magical and alchemical knowledge one could find at Hogwarts, if only he knew where to look. Lucian stood in the quiet of his workshop, staring at the Deluminator in his hand. No matter how many times you switched it on or waved it about, the light it stole would never return on its own. Only the Deluminator could restore it. The more he thought about that, the more he realized it revealed a deep magical principle. Amplify its power, and you could snuff out every beam of light. Yes, even the sun's own radiance, plunging the entire world into darkness. Dumbledore's alchemical talents, it was clear, were unrivaled in the wizarding world. That was why today, Lucian intended to seek out the headmaster. He'd come to learn the art of creating portkeys, what the translation called door keys, because in Lucian's mind, there was no more useful magical device in existence. Apparition only worked to places he'd visited before, and even flying had its limits, especially when you wanted to bring someone else along. He could, of course, stash travelers in his enchanted space-folding suitcase, but sometimes he preferred to keep that particular trick under wraps. Portkeys, by contrast, were like personal teleportation gates. Once you anchored them to a location, they could whisk dozens of people across continents or even between worlds in the blink of an eye. If Dumbledore would teach him that skill, Lucian knew he'd gained not just a shortcut through space, but a freedom he'd never experienced before. With determination in his eyes, he set off for the grand oak door that led to the headmaster's study, eager to begin his most practical and perhaps most daring lesson yet. Lucian doesn't even have to be on the scene to make someone vanish and reappear. He simply hands over a door key, and the recipient is instantly teleported to wherever its twin key lies. With 2 keys in play, 2 people can leapfrog across continents. Wherever one runs, the other can step through the door and join them. In the Marvel Universe, Lucian could scatter keys in every major city and materialize at will in New York, London, Tokyo, wherever he needed to be. In Middle-earth, he can deploy a single portkey to whisk entire battalions of light elves onto distant battlefields, perfect for encirclements, sudden assaults, or deadly ambushes. Chapter 271, Learning to Make Door Keys, Second Update. Lucian materialized on the courtyard's frost-touched stones as the time converter brought him back from noon to 7 a.m. sharp. By now he'd settled into a routine. Arrive in the Slytherin common room at 7, slip down to the Great Hall for breakfast at past, then head to his first class at 8. To avoid bumping into a future or past version of himself, he deliberately chose a different route after each jump. This morning, he skirted the usual corridor and slipped through a side entrance of the castle. No sooner had he passed under the vaulted archway than a familiar, weary figure came hurrying toward him. Hermione Granger, bleary-eyed and clutching her books to her chest, stopped dead. Lucian recognized the telltale signs at once, the dark circles under her eyes, the way her robes were rumpled from yesterday's wear. She must have used the time converter, too. She'd been here at breakfast when he emerged from the common room. Now, she looked as if she'd just stepped out of a 12-hour shift. "Hermione?" he asked softly. She blinked, startled. "Lucian, you weren't supposed to be back so early." He offered a half-smile. "I set the converter for 7. You?" she sighed, pressing a hand to her temple. "Same. I thought I'd have time to study before breakfast, but I overslept and missed my slot. I've been rushing ever since." She glanced around, then leaned closer. "We need to be careful. If our schedules clash, the converters could interfere." Lucian nodded. "Agreed. I'm taking the long way to the Great Hall today. Meet me at the usual table at 7:30? Hermione gave a tired but genuine smile. "I'll be there. And Lucian, thanks." She patted the device concealed in her sleeve before hurrying off. As Lucian resumed his detour, he felt a curious thrill. Each leap through time carried risks, but with Hermione watching his back, he was more confident than ever. Now all that remained was to find out whether this second round of key-making lessons would answer his questions or unlock entirely new mysteries. Hermione wouldn't have come downstairs at this hour under normal circumstances, but there she was, pausing at the entrance to the Great Hall. "Hi, Lucian," she called softly. "Do you want to join me for lunch?" Lucian looked up from his watchful pacing and offered her a small smile. Thanks to their time-turners, neither needed to hide from the other. She knew as well as he did that the figure who just stepped through the castle doors must be his earlier self. Since they'd both been using the devices, their timelines kept crossing. Sometimes it felt like they were meeting for the first time. Sometimes it was a reunion of temporally displaced selves. "I'm not hungry, thanks," Lucian said, shaking his head. He'd just come from breakfast, and if he waited too long, he'd run into the version of himself who entered the hall at 7:30. He could always eat later, after the next loop. Hermione's dark circles deepened as she watched him. "I don't know how you do it," she admitted. "You always look so energized. Meanwhile, I feel like I'm running on empty." She rubbed at her eyes, exasperated but curious. "What's your secret?" Lucian leaned warily against the cold stone wall of the corridor, rubbing his eyes. "We're both human," he complained. "Why can you handle all this work while I feel like I'm falling apart?" Hermione offered him a patient smile. "Well, you're in your 5th year, so you're taking far more classes than I am. I'm only in my 2nd year. Plus, I make sure to spend any free moments practicing magic, reading, or just resting, so I never get completely drained." He managed a tired chuckle. Still, I find it hard to believe you really need to sit through more than a dozen lessons every single day. Couldn't you drop an elective or two? Hermione sighed, glancing at her bulging satchel. If only it were that simple. Each class comes with homework, and they all demand my full attention. And unlike you, I can't simply fly beyond the castle, walls at dawn, find a quiet glade, reset my internal clock, and catch another 5 hours of sleep. She shook her head, a mixture of pride and fatigue in her expression. Lucian couldn't help but admire her resolve. Most adults would have cracked under this schedule. He gave her an encouraging nod. Okay, I'll let you keep all your classes, for now. But you owe me one thing, delicious food in the Great Hall at lunchtime. I'm absolutely starving. Hermione raised an eyebrow. Fair enough. Though after pumpkin porridge for breakfast, I'm craving something a bit more exciting myself. I can't stand pumpkin porridge, Hermione muttered, pushing her bowl aside as she hurried toward the Great Hall. Lucian shook his head at her retreating figure, then turned and climbed the marble staircase to the headmaster's office. He found Albus Dumbledore seated in his favorite armchair, knitting needles clicking as he worked a row of stitches. Morning light streamed in through the tall windows, casting a warm glow over the office. "Good morning, Headmaster," Lucian said, stepping inside. "Are you really knitting that by hand?" Dumbledore looked up with a kindly smile and held his work for Lucian to see. "Good morning, Lucian." "Yes, I am. I could finish it in seconds with a charm, but magic for everything takes away half the fun." Lucian sank into a nearby chair. "You make a good point. Some things, like handmade crafts, lose their charm when machines do all the work. There's satisfaction in doing it yourself." "Exactly," Dumbledore agreed, resuming his knitting. "Machines or charms can replicate an object perfectly, but they can't replicate the joy of creating something with your own hands. It's the same with new life. If we simply conjured a baby into existence, we'd miss out on all the wonder and miracle of birth." He paused to knit another stitch, his eyes twinkling. "Now, tell me, what brings you here this early, Lucian?" Lucian shivered as a cold wind rattled the windows of the headmaster's office. He folded his hands in his robes and spoke quietly. "Professor, I'd like to knit a pair of gloves for a friend who's in Azkaban. Could you teach me how to make a portkey?" Albus Dumbledore set aside his knitting needles and regarded Lucian with calm, pale blue eyes. "What would you like to study today? Transfiguration? Alchemy?" Lucian shook his head. "No, portkeys. How to create one." Dumbledore simply inclined his head. He never asked why Lucian needed such a spell. After all, this young man had been prophesied as the savior of the wizarding world. He must have his own reasons. Besides, Voldemort had ceased to occupy the headmaster's thoughts. He was confident Lucian would handle that threat in due course. For now, Dumbledore intended only to guide him in whatever magic he sought. Leaning back in his armchair, Dumbledore smiled. In the months ahead, he planned a rather peaceful routine, remaining in his office to knit sweaters, tutoring Lucian in the enchantments he desired, and when the mood struck, venturing down to Hogsmeade for a pint. Once Hogwarts students broke for vacation, he meant to pay a long-overdue visit to old friends in Nurmengard, and there he would stay until his twilight years finally caught up with him. As for portkeys, he began, rising from his chair and crossing to a bookshelf, you can enchant nearly any object. The trick is to pick something inconspicuous, something a muggle wouldn't notice. A pebble, a button, even a chipped teacup handle will do, as long as you focus your intention on the destination and tie the enchantment firmly to the item. He paused, selecting a small pewter thimble from the shelf. "Here, watch closely." He brushed the thimble's rim with his wand tip, murmured a concise incantation, and the metal glowed briefly with pale, silvery light. That glow tells you the portkey is bound to its destination. Simply hold it, think of where you wish to go, and touch it against your skin. In a moment, you'll arrive. Lucian's eyes widened. Dumbledore offered him the thimble, and as Lucian took it in his hand, the headmaster gave a knowing nod. Lessons in portkeys, like so much else, had only just begun. Chapter 7. The 3 Types of Portkeys. Under Professor Dumbledore's watchful eye, Lucian immersed himself in the art of portkey creation. There are 3 basic varieties, Dumbledore explained, producing a small copper trinket that shimmered in the lamplight. Lucian studied it closely. 1. Fixed point portkeys. These portkeys are enchanted with a single, unchanging destination, Dumbledore continued. No matter how many you create or where each sits, anyone who touches it will arrive at that preordained location. He held up a second example. For next year's National Quidditch Cup, the Ministry of Magic will distribute fixed-point portkeys worldwide, ensuring spectators can reach the stadium from any corner of the globe. Of course, this convenience hasn't escaped the notice of unscrupulous merchants in the black market. They traffic people illegally, charging huge sums of gold galleons for one-way trips. Dumbledore smiled wryly. On the bright side, fixed-point portkeys are the simplest to enchant, no elaborate runes or complex warding required. 2. Point-to-point portkeys. More advanced than fixed-point variants, he said, tracing an invisible arc in the air. These link two specific locations directly. You touch the portkey at point A and instantly reappear at point B. Crafting them demands greater precision and powerful spell work. He looked at Lucian. In fact, when you traveled to France with the Ministry last month, you used a point-to-point portkey. Lucian nodded, recalling the soft surge of magical energy that had carried him across the channel in the blink of an eye. As Dumbledore laid out the third type, Lucian realized how much still remained to master, and how valuable each portkey could prove on the road ahead. Lucian set the 3 keys he just forged on the workbench and turned to face his companions, ready to explain their uses. First, there are the fixed teleport keys. You make only one at a time, and once it's forged, you stamp in a destination, say, Lumina City or the Moonlit Fortress. Every time you activate it, you're whisked straight to that designated spot. The key never wears out, and there's no limit to how often you can use it, just so long as you want to go where it's marked. Second, the paired teleport keys. These always come in sets of 2. After forging, you separate them, and from that moment on, using either key zaps you instantly to wherever the other one is. It's perfect for emergency escapes or secret rendezvous. Just keep one on your person and send the other to your ally. The third, and most advanced, is the variable teleport key. With this design, you can change the destination mark at will. Today, you could set it for Paris. Tomorrow, switch it to the Great Barrier Reef. One single key, infinite possibilities. Whenever you need to travel, simply dial in the coordinates you've stored, activate the key, and off you go. He paused, letting the gravity of that last point sink in. Imagine it, Lucian added with a grin. One small key that can take you anywhere you choose. Chapter 272, The Marauder's Map, 3rd Update. Lucian stepped out of the headmaster's office and realized it was already noon. He made his way to the Great Hall for a quick lunch, then attended his afternoon classes as usual. When his final lesson ended, he slipped away to retrieve his time-turner and turned back the clock to noon once more, vanishing into the depths of the Forbidden Forest. Though Dementors brooded among the trees, they posed no real threat to him. Under Dumbledore's personal charter, Lucian's off-campus training didn't violate any school regulations, and even if the Dementors dared to confront him, the Ministry of Magic would have no grounds to intervene. He spent the hours till dusk practicing advanced spells and enchantments, pushing his magical limits far beyond anything taught in Hogwarts corridors. As twilight fell, he returned to the castle for dinner, then retreated to his dormitory to immerse himself in his spellbooks. He avoided the common room at night, when younger students from all houses gathered to toss a cowhide ball and play, for he had learned long ago that his serious study habits made him the unintended center of attention, a distraction no wizard striving for excellence could afford. Lucian slipped the time-turner from beneath his robes and, with a careful twist, rolled the hour hand back from 10 o'clock to 5. Within seconds, the twilight of late afternoon enveloped him, and he was once more in the Forbidden Forest, wand in hand. He spent the next 4 hours perfecting a series of advanced charms, levitations, concealment spells, even a few experimental hexes, until the moon rose high and silvered the treetops. By 9:30, Lucian decided it was time to return to Hogwarts. He left the forest's edge and made his way across the grounds, pausing at the greenhouse to pluck a fresh mandrake leaf. It was a full moon night, and he knew the peculiar properties of mandrake made it an ideal lunar focus. He tucked the leaf into his robes and continued on. Inside the castle, Lucian eased himself into the disillusionment charm so he could slip unseen toward the Slytherin common room. He'd almost reached the portrait of the fat lady when two familiar voices rang out. "Hey, look! Lucian!" called one. The Marauder's map, clutched in Fred and George Weasley's hands, glowed softly, pinpointing his hidden position. Lucian suppressed a smile, lifted the charm, and stepped into view. "Good evening, Fred. George," he greeted, bowing his head in mock formality. "I hate to break it to you, but prowling the castle at night isn't exactly by the book." Fred shrugged, grinning. "Rules? Rule. We prefer to test their limits." George winked. "Besides, if we can't push boundaries, what's the point of magic?" With that, the three disappeared down the deserted corridor, each with secrets of his own, and the night echoed with the soft click of wand tips against cloaks. Lucian felt a tap on his shoulder and turned to see Fred and George Weasley grinning at him. "I never would have guessed you'd break curfew and sneak out, Lucian," Fred teased. "Looks like we're all rebels tonight." George Weasley laughed and clapped him on the back. "Thanks for keeping us company on your little adventure." Lucian bowed his head, forcing a rueful smile. He reached into his robes and pulled out a folded parchment. The twins' eyes lit up as George snatched it away. "It can't be," George murmured, smoothing out the paper across his palm. The parchment unfolded itself into the familiar, ink-scribbled Marauder's map. Lucian stiffened. "You saw right through my illusion charm." Fred let out a low whistle. "This is the real deal. Remus Lupin, Peter Pettigrew, Sirius Black, and James Potter, those 4 alchemists, sure left us an impressive tool." George tapped a foot and traced one of the hidden corridors with a finger. "Not only does it map every secret passage they discovered as animagi, it also shows the exact location of everyone in Hogwarts. And look," he added, squinting at the bottom corner, "they even enchanted it to taunt Snall whenever he snoops around." Lucian relaxed slightly as the twins studied the map's shifting footprints and hidden doorways. He'd always admired the brilliance and the mischief of its creators. Seeing it in their hands now only reminded him how extraordinary magic could be. Lucian knew that, despite its origins as little more than a prank by 4 mischievous students, the Marauder's map was powered by some of the most sophisticated magic ever devised. Hogwarts Castle itself teemed with spells and enchantments, yet even here, nothing escaped the map's scrutiny. It didn't merely follow a handful of marked targets, it revealed every being within the castle's walls. Wizards and witches by name, even household cats or stray owls. Not even Professor Dumbledore could conceal himself from its enchanted parchment. In a defensive context, the map's potential was unrivaled. Any intruder who dared cross Hogwarts' threshold would be unmasked instantly, name, location, and all. In theory, one could shrink to the size of a mosquito, cloak oneself in invisibility, and slip unnoticed past every modern ward and surveillance charm. But the Marauder's map would still betray that motion. Lucian refused to let such power go to waste. He wasn't interested in mere surveillance. His goal was to dissect the map's magic, to reverse engineer its wards and alchemical bindings so he could unlock their secrets for himself. Lucian watched, fascinated, as Fred and George pulled out a piece of parchment. Fred tapped it once with his wand tip. George did the same. Instantly, fine ink lines raced across the page like spiderweb threads, crisscrossing until every inch was covered. Then, in neat green cursive, 4 names appeared: Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs, the gentlemen who are pleased to present the Marauder's map. The words faded, and Lucian found himself staring at a detailed floor plan of Hogwarts, complete with dozens of tiny black dots that shifted whenever someone moved. "It's incredible," George said with a proud grin. "We filched this from Filch's office back in first year. Then let's just say we gave his corridors a rather explosive surprise." Fred and George exchanged a triumphant look, and George launched into the tale. He described how they'd waited until Filch was chasing his cat up the stairs, slipped into his drawer, and spirited away the map. Their grand finale had been a dung bomb explosion in the main corridor. Filch never knew what hit him. Lucian laughed at their antics, but his amusement was cut short when Fred's ears twitched. He glanced over his shoulder. "Shh! Filch is on patrol, and Mrs. Norris is right behind him. If they catch us here..." George stuffed the map back under his robes. "Time to go. Follow us." They slipped off toward the stairwell. Lucian tucked in close as the twins melted into shadows, leaving only the distant echo of Filch's grumbling remind them just how close they'd come to getting caught. "Keep your voices down," Lucian muttered, glancing over his shoulder. "Let's slip into a secret passage for a moment. I'll explain once we're hidden." Fred Weasley rolled his eyes. "No need for detours." Before he could finish, Lucian grabbed both twins by the collars and steered them straight toward the ornate mirror in the hall. With a flick of his wand, the glass rippled like still water, forming an open portal. Fred and George exchanged astonished looks as they stepped through. One moment they were in Hogwarts's familiar marble corridor. The next they stood in a perfect mirror image of the hall, only everything was reversed. The walls, the tapestries, even the light fixtures hung in inverse order. "Blimey," Fred breathed. "What spell did you use? I've never heard of this." They crouched behind a reflected column, just in time to see Argus Filch stroll by, muttering about misbehaving students. He carried a broom under his arm, his eyes scanning the corridor, yet he didn't spot them at all. George's grin grew wicked. "Imagine pranking him from here. We could watch him fume, snapping pictures with the magic camera while he searches every corner." Lucian leaned against the mirrored wall, a proud smile on his face. "This is the Hungarian mirror world, a projection spell of my own invention." As soon as Filch's footsteps faded, Lucian tapped the mirror again. The twins emerged back into the normal hall, the surface once more smooth and unbroken. Later, when Professor Dumbledore inquired about Fred and George's sudden disappearance, Lucian wove a harmless tale of a detour through the forbidden forest. The headmaster's pale blue eyes sparkled with amusement, and he placed a finger to his lips. "Tell no one," he whispered. "Better to keep this between us, for everyone's sake." Lucian nodded, already plotting the perfect prank. Lucian let his gaze linger on the Weasley twins. The spells he'd demonstrated, magic unknown in this world but commonplace in his own future, he'd claimed as his own new creations. "Interested?" he asked, voice laced with temptation. "If you're willing, I can teach you everything." Fred and George Weasley exchanged excited looks. "Yes, please," they chorused in unison. "All right," Lucian said, flashing a confident smile. "But there's one condition. I want your Marauder's map in return." He watched them hesitate for only a heartbeat before the twins broke into grins of their own. "Done," they said at once, already picturing the power those new spells would bring them. Chapter 273, Dragon Crystal Fusion Plan, Update 1. Lucian leaned back in his chair, reflecting on how much he'd changed. Not long ago, he would never have dared share the arcane techniques he'd stolen or learned from other worlds. After all, what if an enemy mastered his own spells and struck him down with his own power? It would be like shooting himself in the foot. But those days were over. His strength had grown too great, and as long as he didn't divulge his core secrets, he saw no real danger in spreading minor magics. In the mirror world, in particular, raw attacking power was nearly non-existent, and if an enemy did attempt to use those arts, Lucian's detection wards would pick them up instantly. Already, in Middle-earth, he had founded the Hogwarts Academy, a school dedicated to two specialized disciplines, light magic and giant magic. Both were inherently benevolent, designed to heal, defend, and uplift. Even the gods would approve of such pure, non-aggressive arts. Had he taught the elves, or men, the lethal killing curse, he might have toppled Morgoth in an afternoon. But he knew the risk. The gods themselves would intervene if he dared wield or teach such forbidden power. Similarly, in the world of fairy tale, Lucian had quietly compiled a selection of spells from his Hogwarts curriculum into leather-bound grimoires. Those tomes now rested in the Fairy Tale Guild's library, accessible to anyone pure of heart who sought to learn. He'd come a long way from the cautious loner who hoarded every scrap of arcane knowledge. Now, his vision was broader, to uplift whole races, elves, giants, wizards, and humans alike, by sharing the brightest magics of every realm. With each new student he trained, Lucian felt the future grow a little brighter. And if his Dragon Crystal Fusion plan could harness even a fraction of that light, the balance of power across the multiverse would shift forever. Lucian's latest grimoire even contains the one spell the Fairy Tale Guild desperately needs most, a powerful repair charm. Because the magical laws of his home world differ fundamentally from those here, He's had to adapt the spell from its original wand and incantation form into a magic circle construct that functions in this realm. That conversion hasn't been simple. Principles that are second nature to him remain alien to most fairy tale wizards. But with enough dedication, it can be mastered. So far, however, nobody in fairy tale has taken him up on it. Their mages believe the systems they've honed through years of practice are already optimal. After all, they've never had an alternative. Were Lucian's repair charm a basic trick they could pick up in a day or two, they might at least give it a try. But because it demands both new theory and precise execution, most prefer to focus on the familiar spells they already know. Still, Lucian remains convinced that, sooner or later, someone will recognize just how invaluable his repair magic can be, and that one day, fairy tale will come to rely on it as much as he does. It takes months of dedicated practice to master a true restoration spell, and for most mages, closer to a year and a half. Even then, the early results are often crude. So naturally, few of the guild's practitioners are eager to invest that time, regardless of how crucial Makarov claims the repair arts to be. In fact, guild president Makarov himself has no intention of learning the spell. Why bother when Lucian, the guild's undisputed restoration master, is on hand to fix every broken artifact? Makarov's reasoning is simple. If Lucian ever steps away from the role, only then will it be time for someone else to step up. And even if Lucian departs, he'll surely have taken on apprentices who will carry on the title and the techniques. Very well, we accept that condition, the others agreed. With hardly a second thought, the Weasley twins slid the Marauder's map across the table to Lucian. To them, the map was more novelty than necessity. They already knew every hidden tunnel and corridor at Hogwarts by heart. Its only practical use was to avoid Filch's patrols. But Lucian's Mirror World spell offered the same protection, and far more, since it worked beyond the castle walls. With that spell, they could slip in and out of any place at will, entirely bypassing the caretaker. In comparison, a stationary parchment was almost quaint. Lucian tucked the map into his cloak, a small, satisfied smile playing at his lips. The deal was done, and Hogwarts would never be the same. Lucian slipped the Marauder's map into his robes and offered the Weasley twins a confident nod. All right, that's settled. Tomorrow, I'll track down the right spellbooks for you. If anything doesn't make sense, just ask. Fred and George exchanged excited glances, muttering their thanks before Lucian rose and made his way back to the Slytherin common room. As he climbed the spiral staircase, he mentally reviewed the differences between the magic of this world and the other realms he'd encountered. Fairy Tale's system, he reminded himself, was built on pure illusion and used entirely different incantations. Without careful translation, a student from that world would struggle here. By contrast, the magic from his own world, the one of the Sorcerer's Apprentice, was remarkably similar to Hogwarts traditions. Both recognized Merlin's legacy, relied on wands and enchanted rings, and followed the same fundamental principles. With a few adjustments, he was confident that practitioners could learn each other's crafts with ease. Reaching his dormitory, Lucian set his few belongings by his pillow and drew the curtains against the night chill. As the last of his candlelight flickered out, he lay back, letting sleep carry him away, ready to face tomorrow's challenges. Over the next few days, Lucian worked closely with Dumbledore, mastering the art of creating portkeys. He also spent hours in the Gryffindor common room, guiding Fred and George Weasley through the fundamentals of mirror magic, and pored over every inch of the Marauder's map to unlock its hidden tricks. October 16th, just after lunch, Lucian made his way to Hagrid's hut. The door creaked open, and Hagrid's huge frame filled the entrance. "Lucian!" Hagrid boomed, relief and gratitude shining in his eyes. He set a hefty rock cake on the table. "Thanks for what you did back then. If you hadn't stepped in, Buckbeak might have ended up in a stew." Lucian picked up the jagged cake, bit into it, with a wince at its hardness, and shrugged. "It was Malfoy's fault," he said casually. "No harm done." Earlier that term, during their first Care of Magical Creatures lesson, Lucian had accidentally offended the hippogriff Buckbeak and paid for it with a nasty scratch on his arm. Malfoy, furious at any humiliation, had called in his father's influence to see Hagrid sacked and Buckbeak put down. Thanks to Lucian's timely intervention, Malfoy's wrath had cooled, but the danger had been real. Left with no other option, Hagrid and Harry had turned to Lucian to sort everything out. To him, though, it had been just another day, another problem solved. Lucian had always known Hagrid to be a loyal friend, especially to his beloved hippogriff, Buckbeak. The year before, when Lucian was enrolled in care of magical creatures, he'd spent countless hours helping Hagrid look after the proud creature. So when Lucian spotted Draco Malfoy marching off to fetch his father's influence to have Buckbeak executed, he didn't hesitate. He intercepted Draco in the corridor. "Listen," Lucian said quietly, stopping Malfoy in his tracks. "Your father's connections at the Ministry won't sway a trial that's already underway. If Lucius Malfoy pushes for Buckbeak's execution, not even Dumbledore could save him, especially now that the hippogriff has scratched you. But it wasn't Buckbeak's fault, it was mine. I thought using him in my demonstration would impress everyone during Hagrid's first class. I was wrong. I'm sorry, and I've convinced Professor Dumbledore to take responsibility." Draco's sneer faltered as Lucian laid out the facts. With nothing more to gain, Malfoy turned and stalked back toward the dungeons, leaving Lucian to hurry off to Hagrid's hut. When Lucian arrived, the wooden door creaked open to reveal Hagrid perched on a stool, happily nibbling a rock cake as steam curled from his teacup. He looked up, eyes brightening as he saw his friend. "Blimey, Lucian, good to see ye. How are ye?" Hagrid wiped a crumb from his beard and beamed. Lucian returned the smile. "I'm well, Hagrid, and Buckbeak's in no danger, thanks to a little negotiation." Draco Malfoy backed off when he realized his father couldn't override a formal hearing. Professor Dumbledore agreed to delay the verdict so Hagrid can present his evidence. "That's wonderful news." Hagrid's face glowed. He offered Lucian a rock cake. "Here, have one. They're rock cakes, but they're all mine." Lucian accepted the cake and sank into the chair opposite, taking a bite. "Actually, Hagrid, I came for more than just news about Buckbeak. I know how much you love dragons. I've been researching fire dragons, and I was hoping you could tell me where the different species are most commonly found nowadays." Hagrid's eyes went wide and animated. He leaned forward, almost knocking over his teacup. "Dragons, eh? Now that's a fine subject. I once raised a baby Hungarian horntail. Almost bit my nose off when it mistook me for a rival. But if it's fire dragons you're after, you've got to start with the Australian species." He waved a hand, as if unspooling a map in the air. Most of the Australian fire dragons, sometimes called white eyes for the pale shimmer around their eyelids, are nesting in the mountains of New Zealand. Over the years, some herds have migrated back across the Tasman Sea to the more temperate forests of eastern Australia. They've adapted remarkably well, though they're still fiercely territorial. If you want to observe them, you'll need a permit from the New Zealand Dragon Research Commission or the Australasian Magical Creatures Authority. And whatever you do, keep your distance. Fire dragons aren't as cuddly as hippogriffs. Lucian grinned, scribbling notes in his parchment. "Thanks, Hagrid. That's exactly the information I needed. With your guidance, I might finally earn some credit in dragon studies." Hagrid stood and clapped a massive hand on Lucian's shoulder. "Anytime, lad. You're always welcome here. Just promise me you'll be careful. Dragons may be magnificent, but they've got a temper as hot as their breath." Lucian nodded, carefully tucking his parchment into his cloak. "I will. Thanks again, Hagrid, for everything." As he stepped back out into the cool evening air, Lucian felt lighter than he had in weeks. Buckbeak was safe, and now he had a new adventure ahead, tracking the elusive fire dragons across 2 continents, guided by Hagrid's boundless enthusiasm and hard-earned expertise. Common Welsh greens and Hebridean blacks are abundant throughout the British Isles. The Hungarian horntail, though native to Hungary, now thrives mainly in Romania. And that's just the beginning, Hagrid rumbled, rattling off the names and distinguishing features of all 10 fire dragon breeds in one breath. Lucian listened intently. Over the next few weekends, he planned to travel the globe in pursuit of each species, capturing them, distilling their essence into crystalline form, and fusing the resulting dragon crystals into his own body. It was an audacious undertaking, but to Lucian, this dragon crystal fusion project was the key to unlocking power no wizard had ever dreamed of. Chapter 274, Dragon Hunter Lucian, second update. Lucian had once dismissed the dragons of the arcane realm as little more than overgrown lizards with wings, far too diminutive and crafty to compare with the colossal behemoths he'd battled in fairy tale. But everything changed the moment he fused that magic dragon crystal. He told himself that any enhancement, no matter how small, was worth having. After all, even the lowliest dragon still possessed draconic might. And what could be more formidable than combining the unique strengths of 10 different dragon breeds into a single, multifaceted crystal? He would bolster his physique, magnify his fire jets, and crucially, remedy the one glaring flaw of Morgoth's first-generation magic dragon. Morgoth's original progeny had been unimaginably powerful, but it had been born without wings, forever grounded despite its strength. By integrating 10 diverse dragon crystals, Lucian planned not only to inherit their elemental talents, but to finally grant himself true, unbounded flight. Armed with this new fusion, the dragon hunter felt a surge of confidence. The world would soon witness the melding of draconic legacies, and none would stand in his way. Lucian studied the problem carefully. If his animagus transformation succeeded, he would indeed become a magical dragon, albeit one without wings. He could always summon snow-white wings with a spell, but he winced at the thought. A pair of angelic feathers sprouting from a rippling golden hide would look absurd. Then again, what if he could fuse in the strengths of this world's 10 fire dragons? The result wouldn't be Glorung reborn, but an entirely new Drake, one that combined Glorung's ancient power with the unique gifts of each fire dragon. Such a hybrid would solve his greatest dilemma, confronting Morgoth. Morgoth had forged dragons from his own dark essence. Any ordinary dragon Lucian became would remain inferior and vulnerable to its master. But a hybrid creature, born of magic beyond Morgoth's design, would stand on its own terms. The chances of being suppressed or dominated would drop to nearly zero. Still, Lucian knew the ultimate advantage would come from acquiring a dragon crystal in the fairy tale world before completing his transformation. With that crystal embedded in his heart, his new dragon form, wings, flame, and all, would rank among the most formidable beings across every realm. By the time Lucian returned from Hagrid's hut, the sky was already turning a dull autumn gray. After a quick breakfast in the Great Hall, he made his way back toward the Slytherin common room. As he passed the corridor outside the public resting area, he noticed a crowd of first and second years clustered excitedly around the notice board. Intrigued, Lucian slipped through the throng to read the newest announcement. Attention! On the final Saturday before Halloween, end of October, students in their third year and above, with a parent or guardian's signed permission, are permitted to visit Hogsmeade. Lucian shook his head with a smile. Hogwarts might be Britain's premier school of witchcraft and wizardry, but Hogsmeade was its only truly all-wizarding village. No muggles allowed. Once the headquarters of the 1612 Goblin Rebellion, the village now buzzed with every kind of magical emporium and cozy tavern, its prosperity rivaled only by Diagon Alley itself. Under ordinary circumstances, no student younger than 13 could set foot there without proper authorization. Fortunately for Lucian, Professor Dumbledore had already granted him special dispensation to come and go from the castle as he pleased. While the other students rushed off to secure their parents' signatures, Lucian tucked the scroll into his robes and continued on to the common room, his mind already racing with plans for that first Hogsmeade Saturday. Lucian bade Dumbledore farewell that Friday evening, and unfurling his shimmering wings, lifted off from the castle. A pair of Dementors swooped in to intercept him, but the pure, radiant light radiating from his body sent them shrieking away in terror. Thanks to his time turner, each 2-day weekend effectively became 4 days of free time, and he planned to use them all. Under ordinary circumstances, mastering an animagus transformation demanded at least 2 months, sometimes longer, and there was no shortcut. But with every weekend multiplied, Lucian could comfortably gather the dragon crystals from all 10 dragons before long. He had one more worry, though. He'd originally believed that by consuming mandrake essence for a solid month, he could conjure true storm clouds on demand. But when he mentioned the idea to Professor Dumbledore, the headmaster shook his head. "Weather magic isn't so easily bent," Dumbledore explained. Wizards have tried to manufacture storms with spells before, and they've all ended in disappointment. Dumbledore reminded him that animagus transformations were governed by ancient elemental forces. Ritual magic that echoes the laws of heaven and earth, as the headmaster put it. It was an art that required time, precision, and unwavering patience. There simply wasn't a faster route. Resolved to follow the proper path, Lucian angled his course toward the distant mountain range where the first dragon's crystal lay hidden. His 4 extra days each weekend would be enough, and with each wing beat, he felt a little closer to becoming the great animagus he aspired to be. Lucian sat astride his broomstick, wine tugging at his robes. He reflected on why so many ancient magical practices had fallen out of favor in the wizarding world. Everything from weather manipulation to elemental summoning seemed far too cumbersome. At least Britain's damp climate worked in his favor. With its frequent rain and high likelihood of thunderstorms, many of the more arcane incantations that relied on storm energy were still reliably effective here. Once he cleared the anti-apparition wards surrounding Hogwarts Castle, Lucian vanished into thin air. An hour later, he materialized high above the Hebrides Islands off Scotland's western coast. His quarry hovered in his mind, the legendary Black Dragon of the Hebrides, the closest fire dragon to Britain, and the first beast on his hunting list. He circled the largest island, scanning the rocky shores below. Sure enough, a vast, muggle-repelling charm glimmered in the distance, a shimmering dome of protection that blanketed the entire isle. Wherever fire dragons roamed, wizards were posted to keep both creature and human safe, and to prevent any muggle from catching sight of magical mayhem. Lucian remembered Hagrid's words. For centuries, the MacFasty clan had stood watch over the Hebrides' black dragons, ensuring that neither the dragons nor the unsuspecting locals ever strayed beyond the warded perimeter. Now Lucian's hunt began in earnest, just as it had for every magical hunter who'd ventured this far north. Lucian slipped through the air, his form shimmering as he cast the disillusionment charm. The muggle shield around the Hebdi Islands made no sound as he passed through it, completely invisible. Below him, adult black dragons circled, their obsidian scales rough as volcanic glass, and a line of razor-sharp ridges running down their spines. Their bat-like wings beat powerfully, and their bright purple eyes glowed in the dusk. Each beast could grow to 9 meters in length. Lucian, by contrast, felt the raw surge of magic swelling within him. He was about to become 30 meters tall. "Giant transformation," he muttered. In an instant, he towered over the island, still unseen by the dragons. Spotting one of the adults tearing into a bison, he swooped in, fists clenched around its neck. The dragon thrashed, claws tearing at the air, but Lucian held on tight. "Mirror world," he shouted, plunging them both into the shadowy reflection of reality. In the mirror world, Lucian's massive fist connected with the dragon's skull 3 times in quick succession, each blow echoing like thunder. The creature let out a final, pained roar. As its head lay still, Lucian knelt on the crack, de-earth, and traced the intricate runes of a dragon crystal refining circle with his massive fingertips. Sparks of silver magic flared, coalescing into the first raw crystals beneath the broken scales. Back in the normal world, a lone guard wizard on patrol heard a distant, agonized scream. He paused, wand half raised, searching the silent forest for the source, unaware that Lucian, invisible and colossal, was already halfway through his task. Lucian materialized with a faint pop, and immediately realized the black dragon had vanished. He ran a hand through his hair, puzzled. The other wizard, however, barely paused to acknowledge his confusion. With a curt nod, he disappeared again in a flash of green light. That, it turned out, was perfectly within Ministry guidelines. As long as no muggles accidentally stumbled onto the island and the black dragons remained confined, the Department of Magical Creatures didn't micromanage their keepers. A stray dragon slaying a guard, or a guard slaying a dragon during a skirmish was regrettable but not unheard of. After all, these were not the Romanian enchantresses and warlocks famed for studying fire dragons. Here on the island, Lucian and his colleagues served simply as sentinels, protectors of the black dragons, standing watch while the Romanian wizards conducted their research from a safe distance. Chapter 275, The 100-Year Quest, 3rd Update. While Lucian's counterpart in the Harry Potter world was deep in dragon hunting, the fairy tale version of Lucian was closing in on the same goal. Tonight, he'd returned to Magnolia's famed bar, ready to press Master Makarov for any scrap of dragon lore. Makarov leaned back on his stool, swirling the last drops of his ale. He fixed Lucian with a steady gaze. "You've been asking about dragons non-stop lately." Lucian met his gaze without flinching. "Yes, Master. I've been studying a new form of magic, one that demands I become a dragon slayer. To do that, I need a dragon crystal within 2 months." Makarov let that sink in. 2 months, almost the same deadline Lucian had set for mastering his animagus transformation. He drummed his fingers on the bar. "I see," he murmured. After a long pause, he straightened and spoke more firmly. "If this quest truly advances your magic, and if your strength is up to the task, I'll tell you what you must know. Have you ever heard of the 100-Year Quest?" Lucian's pulse quickened. Makarov had never revealed details of that legendary mission to even the guild's top S-class wizards. Not Natsu, nor Sting, nor any other mage. But now, for Lucian, the bar fell silent as the old master prepared to share one of fairy tale's deepest secrets. Lucian had been worried that Natsu's impulsiveness would get him killed if he charged into the mission without sufficient power. But after listening to Urza's thorough report on the Paradise Tower, Lucian began to believe he might actually stand a chance. He folded his arms and looked up at Master Makarov. "The 100 Years mission," Makarov said, his voice low and serious, "is the hardest assignment in the entire magic world. It's never been completed. Do you know what makes it so deadly?" Lucian tilted his head. "Is it true that the mission involves dragons?" Makarov's eyebrows rose. "Yes, but I can't reveal more than that. You'll only learn the full scope once you accept the mission and arrive. What I can tell you is this. In the last century, every wizard who took on this task failed, and every one of them died. Even Gildarts Cleavy, our guild's famed S-class wizard, disappeared 3 years ago after setting out on this mission. No word has come from him since." A ripple of astonishment ran through the hall. Lucian's heart pounded. Gildarts Cleavy, the legendary powerhouse whom every mage revered, had entered this same mission and vanished without a trace. "He's an S-class wizard?" Lucian breathed. "More than that," Makarov said gravely. "Few in history have matched his strength." Lucian squared his shoulders. He'd heard the stories of Gildarts' legendary feats, and of how even S-class status barely hinted at his true power. Now, standing before the guildmaster, Lucian felt the weight of that legacy, and the burning desire to prove himself worthy of taking on the same deadly challenge. "I must warn you," Makarov said gravely, "he hasn't returned, or completed that mission, in 3 years. Think very carefully before you take it on." Lucian's brow furrowed. To be stronger than the guildmaster himself, it has to be an S-rank assignment, he murmured. 3 years with no news. It's clearly no ordinary job. No wonder they say it involves a dragon. He paused, tail flicking in thought, then squared his shoulders. "All the more reason I'm going. If there's any chance of finding Gildarts alive and finishing that mission, we'll do it together." Was it dangerous? Unquestionably. Even at S-rank, most wizards would be overwhelmed. Gildarts' 3-year silence hinted at a fate worse than defeat. But Lucian wasn't just after mission clearance. He craved a lead on dragons. If the opportunity arose, he would become the dragon slayer he dreamed of being. Lucian reminded himself that it didn't really matter whether he completed the mission. If he ever ran into a threat he couldn't overcome, he'd abandon the assignment without hesitation and make his escape. He was confident in his getaway magic. No matter how many of the 10 holy mages tried to stop him, they wouldn't be able to. What surprised him most was that Guildmaster Makarov had entrusted him with this task in the first place. Since Lucian's repair spell went into full swing, Fairy Tale's coffers had swelled steadily. But once he departed for the 100 Years mission, the guild's fortunes would almost certainly slip back to their old doldrums. And if he never returned, if he died out there, Makarov himself might very well collapse with grief, which meant Lucian needed to leave behind a perfected version of his repair magic in the library, so the guild could keep operating in his absence. But that, he realized, was so like Makarov. No matter how dire the situation, the guildmaster always urged each wizard to pursue his own magical path. Even when Fairy Tale teetered on the brink of bankruptcy, Makarov had never wavered. Now that Lucian was off chasing dragons to hone his craft, Makarov trusted him enough not to fret too much, and that trust was something Lucian intended to honor. Makarov studied Lucian for a moment and then nodded. Since you've made up your mind, wait until after the Harvest Festival to take on this task. He paused, his expression softening. Your life matters most. If you can't complete it right away, you're free to come back to it later. Though the Guildmaster always urged his wizards to push their magical limits, he cared for them like a parent. Losing them on a mission was unthinkable. Understood, President, Lucian replied, meeting Makarov's gaze with steady resolve. He shared the old man's conviction. Living to fight another day was paramount. Outside, Fairy Tale Hall buzzed with excitement. Tomorrow's Harvest Festival, the Guild's grandest holiday, was already in full preparation. Lanterns swung from every rooftop, and colorful banners fluttered in the breeze. At dusk, the Guild would lead its famed magic parade through the town, drawing crowds from neighboring villages. Rumor had it a Miss Fairy Tale contest would be held in the afternoon, and Urza, Miral, and several other female wizards had eagerly signed up. Everywhere Lucian looked, guildmates were decorating stalls, reheating fireworks, and exchanging cheerful greetings, proof that even the toughest of wizards couldn't resist a little festival magic. By the way, has Jelal made it back yet? Lucian asked. Makarov shook his head. Not yet. Right after he recovered, Jalal rejoined Fairy Tale and formed a team with several mages from Paradise Tower for our daily missions. Then, a few days ago, he told me he had some personal business to settle and departed. Lucian frowned. Do you know what it's about? I don't have the full picture, Makarov admitted. But after I glanced through some of his memories, I suspect it involves unfinished business with a certain dark guild. You remember how Olusia bewitched him. He ended up learning powerful spells from a black mage who turns out to be the leader of the 6 demon generals. That's one of the 3 strongest dark guilds around today. Of course, Jalal himself is no pushover, so I'm not overly worried about his safety. But as guildmates, it's only natural we care, especially since you've been studying celestial magic with him. He did send word through the magic crystal, Makarov continued, waving a hand. He said he's still working through it all, and probably won't be back in time for the Harvest Festival. That's a real shame, Lucian muttered, easing himself back onto the bench. He had been counting on Jalal's guidance in celestial magic before setting out on the century-old mission. Now all he could do was wait, either until the mission was complete or until he returned as a dragon slayer, before getting the answers he sought. Chapter 276. The Fairy Tale Civil War Begins. Update 1. Night had fallen over the rolling slopes just outside Magnolia City. High on the hilltop, Laxus Dryar, Thunder Dragon Slayer and heir to Fairy Tale's power, stood cloaked in black. Below him, the newly rebuilt Guild Hall of Fairy Tale glowed against the darkness, a blazing beacon of the Guild's rebirth. A triumphal grin curled his lips. At last, the Thunder Gods have returned, he whispered, eyes gleaming. Our moment is here. The fairies will tear themselves apart, and Master Makarov's era ends tonight. From now on, I will lead this guild to heights it has never known. He lifted his voice so it carried on the wind. Thunder Gods, assemble. From the shadows, 2 men and a woman stepped forward and fell in line behind him. Laxus turned to the green-haired mage at his side. Fried, when you erect the barrier tomorrow, include a clause forbidding all exceeds, cats, if you will, from leaving the guild. Fried blinked in surprise. Exceeds? Cats? You mean Happy? She hardly ranks as a battlefield threat. Why lock her inside? He frowned as he tapped his chin. And remember, each extra restriction weakens the barrier's strength. Laxus's grin only widened. All the same, it must be done. No one, human or exceed, escapes when the Thunder Gods claim Fairy Tale. Originally, our plan included only 2 restrictions. Nobody over 80 and no stone golems could leave the battleground. That way, the Celestial Spirit King, the strongest among them, couldn't intervene, and we'd effectively hold the stone statues hostage. Now we've added a 3rd prohibition. No cats are allowed to exit either. Harpy's brow furrowed. Cats? Since when did we start banning cats? Because of the new spirit, Laxus replied, his voice low and steady. While you were off dismantling the Dark Guild these past few months, They picked up an entirely new cat-class spirit, Lucian. If we don't tie him down in advance, he'll cause more trouble than Urza and Mistgun combined. Harpy leaned back against the table, skepticism clear in her eyes. Lucian? I've heard whispers, but is he really that dangerous? Laxus let out a short laugh. On paper, the Dark Guild's mages look pathetic, but make no mistake, they've grown strong, and every time we underestimate them, it costs us. I've been tracking Lucian's actions, and even if I don't know every trick up his sleeve, I'm certain he's at least S-rank. He's versatile, resourceful, and he casts advanced repair magic that can turn the tide of any skirmish. That's exactly the kind of edge we can't afford to let slip away. Harpy nodded grudgingly. The 3 restrictions now stood firm. No one over 80, no stone golems, and no cats. With Lucian's name added to the list, the command room fell silent, each of them fully aware that underestimating this new spirit could jeopardize the entire operation. Can you believe it? It's a cat, and it's unbelievably powerful. Freed and his companions exchanged astonished looks. Even on missions abroad, they'd only heard rumors about the guild's so-called repair wizard, the mage who cleaned up the magical mess left behind by other wizards. But nobody ever imagined that this cleaner-up crew member would actually be a cat, and one so strong that he caught Laxus's attention. Think about it. In the entire guild, only a handful of names really stood out. Gildarts, off on his legendary 100-year quest, Mistgang, the rare member who could draw Laxus's eye, and the guildmaster himself. Everyone else, even Aluza, was little more than a minor annoyance to Laxus. Yet here was this feline repair wizard, wielding power that belied his size. The next morning, Lucian flapped his wings as he strolled back toward the guild, his paws full of trinkets and decorations for tonight's magic parade. The whole town buzzed with anticipation. Colorful balloons and fluttering ribbons lined every street and storefront, and every home was decked out for the harvest festival. Villagers wore bright smiles, and children darted through the lanes, pretending to be wizards of the fairy tale guild. To the townsfolk, the harvest festival was as beloved as Christmas or the Lunar New Year. Lucian stepped off the train and paused to take in the scene. A steady stream of travelers poured out of the station, blending seamlessly with the festival crowds already filling the town. Some were locals returning for the harvest festival, much like migrant workers coming home for the spring festival, while others had journeyed from distant villages just to join in the celebration. Fairy Tale's annual magical parade was famous across the continent. People came from far and wide to see it. Guildmaster, Mirajane, have we gotten everything? Lucian called as he rounded the corner. At the crossroads stood Makarov and Mirajane, each carrying shopping bags filled with supplies. They greeted him with smiles and laid out their purchases on a nearby barrel. Together, the 3 went over the list one last time to make sure nothing was missing. Satisfied, they set off toward the guild hall. Makarov's eyes twinkled as he watched townspeople laughing and dancing in the streets. "You can feel the festival spirit everywhere, can't you?" he said, his weathered face lighting up with pride. Mirajane nodded enthusiastically. Everyone in the guild has been working on special magic performances for tonight's parade. Lucian grinned, catching the anticipation that crackled in the air. This is it, the grand parade that makes Fairy Tale famous across the continent. Together, they strode on, eager to join their friends and prepare for an evening of dazzling magic and celebration. Lucian, when the time comes, summon that Thunder Titan Urza described and let it lead the procession. Give the crowd a spectacle they'll never forget. Guildmaster Makarov's eyes sparkled with pride. The parade's magic display didn't need raw power, it needed flair. Lucian's Thunder Titan was exactly the kind of breathtaking showpiece he envisioned. And if Laxus joined us, his lightning magic combined with Lucian's thunder, now that would be something truly spectacular. Mirajane's smile faded into a thoughtful frown. She still regretted that Laxus had refused to help during the Phantom Guild's last assault. From what Gajeel and Juvia later reported, not a single branch mage answered the call when the Phantom launched their final offensive. Many branches were obliterated by Mistgun, while others fell to Laxus and the so-called Thunder God tribe. On the surface, he had acted indifferent, but Mirajane knew better. Beneath his rebellious arrogance, he still cared deeply. As soon as Guildmaster Makarov heard the name Laxus, his stern features darkened. "Humph, don't mention that rebellious grandson around me." Lucian stepped forward, concern in his eyes. "Master Makarov, I really think you should lay everything out for him. If you keep dodging the truth, the misunderstanding will only grow, and sooner or later, it'll cause real trouble." Lucian had earned Makarov's trust over the years, often seeking the old man's counsel on magic and listening raptly to his tales of bygone days. From those conversations, he'd pieced together Laxus's story, how the young man once idolized his grandfather, until Makarov drove out his own son, Ivan, from the guild. In the aftermath, father and son became estranged, and Laxus's admiration turned to resentment. What Laxus didn't know was that Ivan had secretly colluded with a dark wizard, betraying the guild from within. Makarov, fearing that such a revelation would shatter Laxus's image of his father, chose to conceal the truth. All Laxus ever heard was that his dad had radical ideas for reforming the guild, ideas that clashed with Makarov's vision, so Makarov exiled him to protect the guild's unity. From Laxus's point of view, it was a simple power struggle, and Lucian, who understood both sides, knew that until Makarov confessed the real story, the rift between grandfather and grandson would only deepen. Lucian's mother died when he was very young, and his father devoted himself entirely to raising high. When he heard rumors of the dragon crystal, he threw himself into the search, only to be rebuffed by his own father, Makarov, on the grounds that it was too dangerous. No wonder Lucian's heart has never settled. He's been insisting Makarov step down as guildmaster and hand the mantle over to him ever since. But after spending more time with Lucian and observing the spark of his psychic talents, Makarov can see the truth beneath the young man's brash exterior. Lucian isn't power-hungry. He cares deeply for his grandfather and for fairy tale. He simply doesn't know how to express it, and his pride keeps getting in the way. If Makarov would only open up, share the whole story, and talk it through, there'd be no obstacle between them, at least in theory. Then again, would Lucian believe him now, after all this time? Makarov sighed. Chapter 277, A Surprise Attack at the Beauty Pageant, Second Update. At precisely 10 o'clock that morning, the fairy tale Miss Contest began in earnest in the guild's ground floor lobby. A hush fell over the assembled crowd as the spotlight illuminated the stage, and standing at its center was Marcos, the sand magician, his flowing cloak drifting in an unseen breeze. He tapped his enchanted microphone, and his voice rang out clear and confident. "Thank you all for waiting. Today, our most beautiful fairies will compete for the crown in the Fairy Tale Miss Selection Contest. I'm your host, Marcos, the sand magician." Below him, 4 judges sat at a long table draped in guild colors. To his left was Master Makarov, representing the guild's wizards. Next to him sat Magnolia's mayor, speaking for the city's civil officials, then the Chamber of Commerce delegate, standing in for Magnolia's merchants, and finally, the citizens, representative chosen by the townspeople themselves. Each judge would award a score to every contestant, and the 4 marks would be averaged to determine her final ranking. The winner would earn not only the coveted title of Fairy Tale's Miss, but also a prize of 500,000 jewels. With the rules announced and the judges in place, the contest was officially underway, though no one could guess what surprises the day still held. Lucian settled into his seat among the spectators, flanked by his friends, Happy, Naz, and Gray. Behind the panel of scoring judges, rows of guild wizards and city banners filled the grand hall, each group cheering for their favorite contender. In this world, ordinary citizens were as fervent in their idol worship as any fan here on Earth. Only their idols were powerful magic users from the great guilds, not actors or singers. True to his nature, Lucian, though he took the form of a cat, was still very much a man at heart. He'd set aside his spellbooks for the afternoon. After all, even the most dedicated mage needed a break now and then. Watching a beauty pageant in the magical arts was as good a way as any to refresh the mind and lift the spirits. A hush fell over the arena as the announcer's voice boomed through the enchanted speakers. "Now, please welcome our #1 beauty of the evening, the exotic enchantress, Kana Arupalona." Spotlights converged on the stage as Kana stepped forward. Her long, raven-black curls framed a striking face, and she held her custom magic deck, each card glittering with arcane runes. With a graceful flick of her wrist, she sent the cards spinning into the air. Instantly, the cards ignited in a cascade of soft, multicolored light that swirled around her. As the glow waned, her flowing gown had vanished, replaced by a curve-hugging, jewel-toned bikini that shimmered with embedded magical sigils. A ripple of excitement swept through the audience. Some whistled, others applauded, and the judges raised their paddles in unison, awarding her top marks before she'd even uttered a single incantation. Lucian leaned back, a knowing grin on his feline face. This was only the beginning. Hoppy perched on the bar, one booted foot dangling as she leaned in with a grin. You know why Kana's entered this tournament? She's racked up a mountain of wine tab with the guild, and she's betting that the first-place prize will clear her debts. In Fairy Tale, Hoppy is the undisputed queen of gossip, second only to Mirajane herself. Kana started drinking when she was 13, Hoppy went on. According to Mirajane's ledgers, a full 1/3 of the guild's annual liquor sales goes straight into Kana's glass. A third? Someone gasped. She really is the reincarnation of the god of wine. Lucian shook his head with a rueful smile. The guild crowd was no stranger to spirits. Every wizard knew a celebratory drink after missions, but Kana treated it like an Olympic sport. Whenever she appeared, you could bet there'd be a flagon in her hand. Rumors even say she once polished off an entire bucket in one sitting. She might not walk away with the beauty crown, Hoppy teased, but she'd crush everyone in a drinking contest. Lucian couldn't help grinning. He'd heard bits and pieces about Kana's magic. She wasn't just a party girl. Her specialty was card spells capable of calling forth wind, fire, thunder, and lightning. If those stories were true, she was a force to be reckoned with, whether it was on the battlefield or at the banquet table. Lucian had only just mastered card-sealing magic under Shio's guidance in the Tower of Paradise, yet within Fairy Tale, his power already ranked third, outmatched only by Natsu and Grey. Across the continent, very few mages could claim true S-class potential. In the guild's library sat an ancient volume on card magic, and as soon as he returned from the Centennial Quest, Lucian planned to study it obsessively, particularly Shio's sealing techniques. Meanwhile, his clone in the Mage Apprentice world was learning Balthazar's Matryoshka sealing, a skill Lucian intended to integrate seamlessly with his own card seals. The next contender is our second beauty, the announcer's voice boomed through the Colosseum. A newcomer to the guild, yet already wielding S-level strength. Please welcome Juvia Rocks. At his cue, a hushed awe swept the crowd. Juvia stepped onto the stage in a long, flowing blue coat that caught the lights above. Her cropped hair framed a face of quiet determination. In an instant, her form liquefied, droplets lifting into an elegant dance overhead. Then, as if the water had condensed by magic, she reappeared in a sleek, azure bikini-fitted armor, every drop back in place. Only weeks earlier, Juvia and Gajeel had been under the sway of the Ghost Guild's nefarious leader. After the climactic ghost incident, Master Makarov had welcomed them both into Fairy Tale. They're not bad at heart, he'd said with a warm smile. Only misled by darkness. Show them who we really are, family. This is your innate ability, Lucian thought, mesmerized as Juvia's body dissolved into water. Her magic wasn't like the water spells ordinary wizards learn. It was born inside her. Before she even mastered control, wherever she went, the sky opened and rain poured down. No wonder everyone called her the Rain Girl. Lucian had tried to replicate her power, transforming into water, passing through attacks, but it was impossible. It reminded him of the magical world of Harry Potter, where some witches and wizards appeared destined for certain gifts, legilimency, prophecy, or the rare talent of a metamorph magus. Fairy Tale had its own prodigies. Juvia's water magic was one of them, innate from birth, later honed with formal training. Mirajane once mentioned another such mage, Abby Green, one of Laxus's thunder gods. Abby wields fairy magic, but she was born with a petrifying gaze so uncontrollable she keeps to wearing protective glasses. Now, all eyes turn to the competition's star attraction. Juvia, her beauty the talk of an entire continent, stepped forward, the undisputed favorite to win. Mirajane Strauss stood under the Guildhall's bright lights, waving to the sea of faces before her. As Fairy Tale's beloved poster girl and master shapeshifter, everyone expected her to compete. Instead, she flashed a mischievous grin. "Don't worry," she called out. "I'm just your host tonight." With a puff of mirror magic, Mirajane's features melted into those of her guildmates. Natsu's fiery grin, Gray's brooding smirk, even Happy's whiskered cat face, and to Lucian's bewilderment, his own expression. Laughter and applause rippled through the crowd. Next up was Urza Scarlet, the guild's indomitable fairy queen. She struck a warrior's pose, summoned her crimson plate armor, and in a single blink swapped it for a gothic Lolita maid outfit of lace and ribbons. The contrast between fierce knight and doll-like charm stole every breath in the hall. "I do love a good wardrobe," Urza admitted, bowing gracefully as the audience erupted in cheers. From the side wings stepped Levy McGarden. Petite and scholarly, she wove her words into delicate snowflakes that drifted over the crowd, each icy glip, etched dissolving into a warm, rosy glow on every face. The display of snow-based word magic melted more than a few hardened hearts. Then Bisca Connell took the stage. Clad in sleek, Western-style leathers, she loaded her magic pistol with a casual grace. Bullets glowed like embers as they spiraled and darted through the air in perfect formation, punctuated by sharp reports that echoed like drumbeats. By the time the last tracer fizzled out, even the hardest skeptics were on their feet. Finally, Lucy Hartfilia appeared, arm in arm with Lucian. She rattled her celestial spirit keys, summoning starlight that painted constellations above the crowd. Lucian leaned over the railing, teasing, "So, heard any juicy gossip about beauty pageants you can rent out?" Lucy flushed, then grinned, and with a flourish called upon her spirits to dance in a fountain of golden light. But the applause hadn't even begun when a cold, haughty laugh cut through the hall. "Oh, ho, ho, ho! Fairies and beauties, all bow before me!" Shadows rippled at the far end of the stage, and a tall, cloaked figure stepped into the light. Silence fell like ice as every eye fixed on the newcomer. Abby Green stepped onto the stage in a sweeping emerald gown, her pince-nez glinting under the lights. In one hand, she held an ornate fan. In the other, she bore the unmistakable confidence of someone who believes victory is already hers. With a slow, deliberate bow, she announced, "Yes, I am the true fairy of the guild, and this championship belongs to me, Abby Green." Lucian, who had just been warming up backstage, started forward, his protest already forming on his lips. But before he could take a single step, an invisible force froze him in his tracks. His posture stiffened, limbs locked in defiance that went nowhere. At that same moment, the heavy curtains at the front of the guild hall parted with a dramatic flourish. Urza and the other contestants, fresh from their own performances and gathered expectantly behind the drapery, watched in horror as one by one they were struck motionless, their expressions mid-cry, mid-cheer, forever caught between action and oblivion. Sensing disaster, the ordinary guild members in the audience erupted into chaos. Chairs scraped, tables overturned, and merchant stalls were abandoned in an instant as everyone raced for the exits. Shouts of alarm echoed off the high stone walls while Abby Green remained unruffled under the spotlight, her fan flicking open and closed in a quiet aria of triumph. Chapter 278, Counterattack at Shenming Temple, third update. President Makarov leaped onto the banquet table, his beard quivering with fury. "Abby Green, what on earth are you doing? Why haven't you dispelled those petrification spells and returned everyone to normal?" Abby Green smiled serenely behind her ornate fan, her tone light as a spring breeze. "Oh, President, I merely thought a little theatrical flair would liven up the festival." "Then let the show begin," she announced, sweeping her fan aside. In an instant, a jagged bolt of lightning split the sky above the stage. When the thunder subsided, Laxus stood there in a long, dark coat, thunder crackling around him. From the shadow of the guild hall's marble columns, two more members of the Thunder God tribe emerged. Freed, Justine stretched his arms, and Bixlo toyed with the strings of his puppet, Cobra, his fingers twitching with anticipation. "Time to have some fun, old man." Laxus called down to Makarov. "Laxus, you insolent brat, undo those spells this instant." Makarov's chest expanded, his magic flaring as he strove to regain control. Instead, Laxus grinned and summoned another flash of lightning that struck the ground beside the stone-still figure of Lucy Hartfilia. "Careful, Grandpapa," he warned. "Your guildmates are my hostages now, so here's my proposal. A sanctioned contest, Fairy Tale's strongest battle. You've got 3 hours within the city limits of Magnolia. Whoever stands last wins. Think you can handle that? Silence fell as the members of Fairy Tale, frozen in magical stone, and the assembled townsfolk realized they had no choice but to accept Laxus's challenge, or watch their friends remain trapped forever. If there's no victor in 3 hours, everyone here will be ground to powder. The guild hall fell silent at Laxus's roar. Before anyone could react, a sleek black cat darted out from the shadows. Its tail shot around Abby Green's ankle, yanking her off her feet. Stone crept up her legs in an instant, freezing her solid. "Abby!" Lucy and Urza shouted, only to find themselves locked in place, their bodies stiffening into gray statues. That was Lucian's cue. He swept his mind through the hall, pinpointing Laxus skulking at the edge of the chamber with 2 allies, and seeing Urza, Lucy, and the others petrified further back. Trusting Gray to act, he sent a quick mental message: "Freeze the floor." At Gray's command, ice erupted across the polished wood, coating every inch in a thin, glimmering sheet. In that moment of distraction, Lucian drew a polished silver mirror from his belt, chanting the words of his portal spell. With a ripple in the air, he vanished into the mirror world. He rematerialized beside Abby in that shimmering dimension, finding her unconscious on a marble table. Gently, Lucian lifted her into his arms. Abby's breathing was shallow but steady. "Fairy Tale's greatest brawl is supposed to be thrilling," he murmured, tucking her closer. "Not hostage-taking." With that, he stepped back through the mirror. Back in the real hall, Laxus and his cronies were now struggling to keep their footing on the ice. As they slipped and stumbled, the petrification enchantment lost its hold. Lucy and Urza shook themselves free, rushing to help Abby to safety. Lucian emerged from the mirror's frame, Abby cradled against his chest. He set her down gently, meeting Laxus's furious glare head-on. "This isn't how we settle scores," he declared. "If you want a fair fight, leave the tricks and the innocent out of it." A narrow, shadowy tail lashed out and yanked Abby Green through the rippling veil of the mirror world. Before she could fully comprehend what was happening, a surge of crackling electricity pulsed through her body, knocking her to her knees. Seizing the opportunity, Lucian unleashed Abby's petrification magic. Unlike a basilisk's unbreakable curse, Abby's spell didn't leave victims frozen forever. It required Lucian's constant focus and could be lifted or intensified on a whim. With a single thought, he could restore someone to flesh and blood or shatter them to dust. If he lost concentration or was rendered unconscious, the magic would simply fade away. It was a devastating ability, one that no one, least of all Urza Scarlet's veteran mages, had anticipated. Many fell victim to it in an instant, their bodies locked in stone-like rigidity. "Well done, Lucian." Lucian heard a voice cry out in triumph. At that signal, all of his petrification wards dissolved simultaneously. Lucy and the others, those who had been turned to statues, were free once more. Relief swept through the rescued guild members as they scrambled to their feet. Across the field, Laxus, Freed, and Bixlow exchanged dark, frustrated looks. Their entire strategy had hinged on holding hostages. Without them, their magical forces couldn't be deployed to full effect. "He saw this coming," Freed growled, clenching his fists. "That cat's become a real thorn in our side." Laxus ground his teeth. "That's enough for today," he ordered. With their leverage gone, the trio had no choice but to withdraw, for now. But as they melted back into the shadows, it was clear that the battle was far from over. "You and the Thunder Gods will apologize to everyone, and then accept the harshest punishment until they forgive you." Makarov shrank back to his normal size, pointed a trembling finger at Laxus, and roared. Laxus threw back his head and laughed, veins standing out on his forehead. "So I still underestimated you, old man. Very well, let's take this up a notch." He thrust his arm into the air. A blinding bolt of lightning tore through the guild hall and streaked across the city sky. Instantly, the floating thunder orbs that hovered above the city sparked to life. "I hereby open the Hall of Divine Sound." Laxus's voice boomed like a storm. "Every soul in this city is now my hostage. Refuse to play my game, and I'll obliterate it all." Freed's heart pounded. He knew Laxus better than anyone. His cousin's fierce love for Fairy Tale drove him, and his dream of becoming guildmaster was born from a desire to make the guild stronger. Yet this was beyond recklessness. Holding innocent people hostage with a divine relic was a gamble that could end in catastrophe. He swallowed hard and met Laxus's fiery gaze. "Cousin, do we really have to go this far?" But the thunder in Laxus's eyes only deepened. Freed squared his shoulders. "Fine. If this is the line you've drawn, then so be it. This is all-out war. It ends only when one side is utterly destroyed. If you can't keep up with me, you'll be gone. My fairy tale has no room for cowards." A blinding storm of thunder and lightning raged around Laxus, crackling at his skin like living chains. His eyes gleamed with a manic fervor, as though each bolt of power frayed the last threads of his sanity. Freed stepped forward, chest heaving. He saluted with grim resolve. "Master Laxus, wherever you lead, we follow." Makarov's face blanched. "House of Gods, Laxus, what have you done? Are you mad?" The old master's voice trembled with terror and outrage. Lucian, who had only just recovered, watched the scene in disbelief. He turned to Mirajane, who was rushing toward them. What is this divine call palace Laxus mentioned?" Mirajane's eyes were cold and serious. "It's known as the Divine Hall, a forbidden thunder magic. 300 specially forged magical crystals are precharged with condensed lightning. Then, when they're arrayed in the Temple of Divine Calling, a single activation unleashes all that energy in an instant. It's enough to obliterate an entire town in one cataclysmic blast. And until you trigger it, there's no way to destroy the crystals or stop the spell." Silence fell, broken only by the distant roar of tempestuous power. Magnolia itself trembled at what Laxus had set in motion, and at the unthinkable question of who might survive once the Divine Hall answered his call. Lucian stepped forward into the vaulted guild hall, his gaze locked on Guildmaster Makarov. Around them, dozens of wizards braced themselves as crackling energy danced across the ceiling's magic crystals. "Remember," Makarov warned, his voice cold, "every time one of these crystals shatters, the same lightning you unleash will rebound upon you." Laxus, his aura already surging with raw power, snorted. "Then it's a risk I'll gladly take." Lucian stroked his chin, meeting Makarov's glare. "Guildmaster, you drove my father out for less than this," he said softly. "I'm not mad. I want what's best for Fairy Tale. Hand me the title of guild president now. Once I'm in charge, I'll turn this timid, fractured guild into the strongest force anyone has ever seen, one no enemy dares challenge." At those words, Lax's magic flared so violently that every mage in the hall staggered under its weight. Makarov's robes billowed as he trembled with fury. "Impossible," he shouted, voice echoing off the stone walls. "I will never surrender my office to you, not in life, not in death." Laxus's grin turned savage. "Then let the contest begin." Just as Laxus raised his hand to strike, Lucian stepped between them and held up a warning finger. "Wait, Laxus," he said, voice low but carrying through the hall. "You don't know everything. Your own father, Ivan, was expelled from the guild for treachery. He secretly parleyed with the Dark Guild's wizards. Do you still think this challenge is about honor?" A stunned silence fell. Laxus's lightning crackled uncertainly in his palm. Even Makarov paused, breath caught in his chest. In that suspended moment, the fate of Fairy Tale and its leadership hung by a single flickering spark. "I'd be happy to help. Please go ahead and paste the full chapter you'd like me to revise, and I'll transform it into a polished, idiomatic English version with Lucian as your male protagonist." Chapter 279, Lucian's True Strength. "What did you say?" Lucian's words struck Laxus like a bolt of lightning. He froze in his tracks, then whirled to face Grandmaster Makarov, disbelief etched across his features. "Grandmaster, is this true?" Laxus's voice was rigid with tension. Makarov sighed heavily and sank onto the edge of his chair. "Yes, Laxus, it's the truth. I held back because I feared you wouldn't accept it, but the time has come for you to know everything. Let's leave it at that for today." He ran a hand through his hair, exhaustion in every line of his face. Things had gone too far to be swept under the rug any longer. If Laxus didn't understand the full story, he risked repeating his father's mistakes, and that could end in calamity. Makarov had regretted his silence the moment Lucian first spoke of this in the morning. Secrets only grew heavier over time. Silence fell across the room. Laxus bowed his head, wrestling with the weight of the revelation. Just when everyone assumed he would call off his next move, Lucian stepped forward, his brow creased in determination. "Wait," Lucian said, voice calm but firm. "There's more you need to hear." Lucian's heart pounded. as he felt Laxus's magic surge wildly out of control. There was no hint of regret or clarity in the air, only pure, raging fury. "What a joke," Laxus snarled, veins bulging on his forehead as crimson lightning crackled around him. "You choose now to bring your revelations? Even if they're true, they won't change my mind. The game goes on my terms. And mark my words, I won't just wipe out this town's residents. I'll erase every last one of you." With a sharp snap of his fingers, Freed and Bixro materialized at his side, and in a blinding flash of lightning, the three of them vanished from the guild hall. A booming voice echoed through the empty chamber. 3 hours. In that time, you may battle one another. Only the victor earns the right to challenge me. Fail to produce a winner in 3 hours, and I will obliterate this town and this fairy tale. Then I will rebuild us in my own image. Lucian ground his teeth and clenched his fists. Watching the lingering sparks fade, he realized there was only one way to reach Laxus now: by force. In moments like this, 2 outcomes were possible. Either Laxus would finally see reason, admit his folly, and beg Master Makarov's forgiveness, restoring the bond between grandfather and grandson, or the storm raging within him would consume everything in its path. Lucian braced himself. Time was already running out. There's always a chance that Laxus, prideful, obsessed, and tangled in years of conflicting thoughts, will refuse to admit what's in his heart and swing to the opposite extreme. When that happens, there's only one cure: knock some sense into him with a good, hard beating until he finally awakens to his true feelings. A classic friendship facebreaker fist. "What should we do, Master?" someone asked. All eyes turned to Master Makarov. He drew in a deep breath, steeling himself. "I'll handle the Celestial Palace," he said quietly. "Lucian, use your tracking magic to lead the others straight to Laxus. Once we find him, subdue and arrest him. He's gone too far. After that, I'll expel him from the guild." Thanks to his giant magic-enhanced physique, Makarov can absorb the backlash from shattering 300 magic crystals, making him the perfect choice to breach the Celestial Palace head-on. With Lucian's tracking spell guiding them, and the combined strength of Urza, Natsu, and the rest, they'll have no trouble bringing down Laxus and the 2 remaining Thunder God disciples. Lucian's jaw tightened as word came in. Laxus had gone over the line. He was threatening to level the entire town and the guild hall itself. As guildmaster, Lucian could not let that stand. He raised his voice so all could hear. "Laxus, you're expelled, effective immediately." A young officer at Lucian's side bowed. "Understood, President." Lucian swept an outstretched hand through the air and read the incantation of his tracking spell, direction revealing. "Laxus, Doria." Immediately a pale point of light swirled into existence above Lucian's palm, marking the traitor's location. Lucian closed his eyes for a moment, weighing his options. Honestly, this wasn't as dire as it looked. Even if he'd chosen to stand back and let the guild council handle it, Lucian could have neutralized the divine magic emanating from the God of Sound Palace outside the town gates in a few different ways. First, he could tap into his Titan transformation. It wasn't as potent as the Guildmaster's own giant form magic, but it still massively boosted his defenses. On top of that, his fused dragon crystal had granted him extraordinary physical resilience and a strong innate resistance to magic. He'd tested it last month against Feral Drake's flames and come out barely singed. And this was even more favorable. The backlash pulse from the God of Sound Palace came in pure electrical energy. Since Lucian specialized in storm magic, he could channel that energy through himself, dissipating at least 90% of its force harmlessly into the atmosphere. If raw defense wasn't enough, he had a second option: mirror magic. A single flick of his wrist, and the palace's power could be yanked into the mirror realm, leaving its effects confined to that dimension. Even if Laxus unleashed the full wrath of the God of Sound Palace, not a bolt would touch the town itself. Lucian allowed himself a tight smile. Between his storm affinity, draconic fortitude, and mastery of reflection spells, he had all the tools he needed. With a nod to his officer, he set his mind to one thing: find Laxus and end this threat before it ever reached Doria's walls. Lucian's confidence wasn't born of arrogance, but of cold, hard calculation. With the amplified power of his wand, he could weave a super armor barrier around the entire town, an impervious shield capable of neutralizing even the god of Sound Palace's fearsome assault. That deity could hurl 300 lightning strikes at once, blanketing every street and alley, yet each bolt merely represented 1/300th of its full might. At Lucian's current mastery, his barrier would laugh off every one. And as for Laxus, Lucian would handle him alone. He wasn't boasting. His magic really had outstripped the guild president's. He'd attained the rank of Saint 10, fully rounded and without weakness, a feat few could claim. Months of disciplined meditation to draw energy from the magic crystal and the space gem had sharpened his focus to a razor's edge. His countless clones, scattered across parallel worlds, had emerged from rigorous training. Meanwhile, his bond with the magic dragon had evolved, flooding him with additional arcane strength. Now, beneath gathering storm clouds, Lucian stood at the town's outer wall. Lightning crackled on the horizon, and the air hummed with divine fury, but in his steady grip, the wand glowed bright. A single, perfect incantation would light the runes on his super armor barrier. When the first of those 300 bolts struck, it would be like nothing more than a summer shower. And then, Laxus would learn just how unstoppable Lucian had become. In the realm of magical apprentices, Lucian's power rating has exploded from 500 to over 800, a leap that has dramatically increased both his raw magical strength and the potency of every spell he commands. He's mastered new incantations, plunged deeper into arcane theory, and sharpened his skills through endless practice and combat. Under Dr. Muon Sudo's experimental regimen, his supernatural abilities now verge on those of a 5th-tier ability user. But Lucian didn't stop there. He fused with the magic dragon's crystal, inheriting a portion of its draconic essence, and absorbed the dragon crystals of several fire dragons drawn from the wizarding world of Harry Potter. Those bonds bolstered his physique to superhuman levels. As a result, his overall power now far exceeds what he wielded when he clashed with Jalal atop the Tower of Paradise. Jalal himself ranks among the elite Saint 10, making him one of the most formidable fighters in existence. By comparison, Lucian has risen to at least that rank, and likely sits near its very summit. Even Laxus, the Thunder Dragon Slayer wizard, whose body devours and nullifies lightning, finds that his fiercest storms barely scratch Lucian's defenses. Lucian's talents went far beyond simple thunder magic. His mastery of electromagnetism let him not only summon lightning, but also bend metal to his will. With a golden arrow of arcane energy shimmering in his hand, he strode ahead of Makarov and the rest of the guild toward the massive stone gate. Just as Lucian reached out to push the doors open, a crackling sound filled the air. An invisible wall of energy sprang up before him, halting his every step. "It's a magic barrier," Lucian muttered, pressing a palm against the shimmering field. The wards woven into it were familiar, precise, powerful. Someone had already laid protective spells around the guild. Lucian had studied barrier magic himself, but he'd never cast one with this level of finesse. Chapter 280, Lucian, the Preparatory President, second update. 80 runes set. No one's getting through now. A lattice of glowing sigils materialized in midair before the guild's gate. Levy stepped back, eyes narrowing. "That's Freed's work." Guildmaster Makarov reached out, but an invisible barrier repelled his hand. "This is bad." "It's far worse than bad," Levy agreed, her voice low. Lucian remembered Levy's warning. Although Levy was one of Fairy Tale's top intellects, the true arcane genius of the Thunder Gods Guild was Freed. His expertise in spellcraft and dark runes flirted with S-class power. Indeed, many external guilds boasted mages who surpassed ordinary S-class thresholds. Freed's magic demanded painstaking preparation. Each seal had to be precisely placed, often hours in advance. But once complete, his arrays were virtually unbreakable. Even Makarov, one of the 10 wizard saints, could not force his way through. That impenetrable barrier was exactly why Laxus had dared to storm an entire guild with only 3 allies by his side. A grin cracked across Natsu's face as he cracked his knuckles. "Fine, then I'll take care of Laxus myself." With that, the Fairy Tale members squared their shoulders, ready to challenge Freed's enchanted bulwark and defend their guildmaster, come what may. "I've been looking forward to a rematch with him," Natsu shouted. He charged straight for the guild doors, but with a thunderous crack he slammed into an unseen benzene barrier and was hurled backward. "Why won't it?" Natsu sat up, rubbing his head in confusion. Across the room, his guildmates stared in astonishment. Urza and the others hurried to the doors and stepped out as if nothing were there. But when Makarov, Lucian, Happy, Natsu, and Gajeel tried, each was stopped cold by the invisible wall. "It doesn't make any sense," Lucian said, brows furrowed. "This barrier should enforce its parameters without fail. Why are only Natsu and Gajeel trapped?" Lucian's mind raced. He'd mastered protective wards back at the academy. He knew exactly how barriers identify friend from foe. The only traits that bypassed this particular magic were being over 80 years old or taking the form of a cat. Happy, of course, was a cat. But Natsu and Gajeel were neither, let alone ancient. "It can't be age, and they're definitely not felines," Lucian muttered. "So what gives?" He forced himself to set the puzzle aside. No time for theorizing. Raising his staff, Lucian wove transformation magic. In moments, his body shimmered and stretched into the shape of a vast, polished mirror, its surface gleaming with latent power. Lucian finished the last syllable of the incantation, and the surface of the hand mirror rippled like water. He handed it to Urza. "Urza, you're airborne. Use this mirror space to pull every floating magic crystal into it. If Narahan can't deploy them, he won't be able to hurt the townspeople. As soon as I break Freed's seal, we'll hunt down Laxus." "Leave it to me," Urza shouted. In an instant, her armor shifted into the sleek black feather Kai form. Gripping the mirror, she rocketed toward the 300 crystals hovering over the town square. Meanwhile, Lucian called Levi forward. "Help me dismantle Freed's barrier," he said. Around them, the other fairy tale mages obeyed Master Makarov's orders and held their positions. None of them, aside from Grey and Juvia, who were ready to track down Laxus and his Thunder God allies, dared rush into danger. The rest remained on standby, prepared to bring food and healing rather than join the fight directly. Levi peered at the swirling runes of Freed's enchantment, frowning. "This weaving is incredibly complex. I can't see the pattern." She tugged at a stray lock of hair. "I guess I'll have to hit the library and find some references." Lucian smiled. "No need," he said, crossing his arms. "I've memorized every magic technique tome we have. Just tell me which part troubles you, and I'll explain it." As Urza soared above, the mirror's surface began to glow, drawing the crystals in one by one. Lucian set to work on the barrier's keystones, confident that with Levi's help and the others holding the line, they'd soon be free to face Laxus, and whatever thunder might follow. Lucian offered a calm smile. "If you need any information, just ask." He reached out and traced an intricate pattern over the shimmering barrier between them. "This ward isn't an ordinary enchantment. It's built on Gil's grammar. If the two of us work together, we can take it apart." By enchantment standards, Lucian was still very much a novice, light years behind the likes of Levi, and unthinkably outclassed by Freed, whose barriers could hold even a Holy 10-member captive. He couldn't have erected a ward of this sophistication himself. But dismantling a spell is a different art than weaving one. Once you grasp the rules that govern the ward, identify its hidden vulnerabilities, and apply the right counter-formulas, you can unravel it from the inside out. Magical barriers can be terrifying for anyone unaware of their mechanics. Yet for a practitioner who understands spellcraft, even one just starting out, a determined study of the ward's design is enough to crack its defenses. That's why barrier enchantment never became mainstream. It remains the specialty of linguamancers, those who wield the subtle power of words as their magic. Lucian had devoured every spellbook in the library, committing every incantation and arcane principle to memory. With 6 minds working in perfect concert, he could untangle even the most intricate warding. In fact, without Levi's assistance, he could breach Freed's barrier in under 10 minutes. Normally, Lucian and his clones were scattered across multiple worlds, each body dedicating itself to a different branch of magic. In the Harry Potter universe, one clone was mastering alchemy, in the realm of the Sorcerer's Apprentice, another was honing sealing spells. In Academy City, a third was studying the mysteries of Kabbalah, and in Middle-earth, yet another was perfecting elven sorcery. Only Lucian's primary body, here in the main world, lacked a native magical discipline of its own. Whenever the magic of any world proved especially challenging, Lucian would lend the collective strength of his other selves. Likewise, if one clone encountered a crisis, all 6 would temporarily set aside their current studies and unite their focus to resolve the problem. Now, with Freed's impenetrable barrier standing between him and his goal, Lucian prepared to marshal their combined power and shatter the spell barrier once and for all. Aside from the clone brain pulled in from the fairy tale world, already dissecting the spell at lightning speed, 5 other minds were working in unison. With 6 intellects running in parallel, and Lebby guiding them every step of the way, they unraveled Fried's complex enchantment bit by bit. At that pace, they estimated it would take no more than 5 minutes to break it open. "Done!" Lebby cried, her eyes shining with excitement, exactly 5 minutes later. "Lucian, I never expected you to grasp this so quickly. You've reached an impressive level in magical theory in no time." Lucian smiled and gave a small shake of his head. "Honestly, I just read a lot of books. Theory is my forte. You handled the details." He stepped aside and motioned to Levi. "You're the one who really knows how to put this into practice." Levi nodded, taking Lucian's place at the controls. While Lucian excelled at high-speed analysis and coordinating 6 minds simultaneously, Levi's practical skill with the ritual itself was simply unmatched. Together, their combined talents had finally undone Freed's formidable enchantment and opened the way forward. Even if Freed were able to analyze every thread of his own magic and devise a brand new barrier, it would still take him more than 10 minutes to reweave it. Yet Levi dismantles the entire art in under a minute, rendering the barrier null and void. "I'm getting too old," Makarov admits softly to himself. "Perhaps it's time to find someone worthy to carry O.N." Makarov watches as Lucian stands amid the dissipating energies. It hasn't been long since Lucian joined Fairy Tail, but in that short time, he's done more for the guild than many seasoned wizards. Strong in power and unwavering in character, Lucian has earned the respect and trust of nearly every member. And if he happens to look like a cat, well, Fairy Tail has never cared about appearances. From this moment on, Makarov resolves to teach Lucian the guild's ultimate super magic, fairy law, before sending him off on the legendary Century quest. With that power, Lucian will have the strength to find guild arts and bring him home safely. Once Lucian returns triumphant, Makarov will finally step down and hand over the guild's leadership. Part of Makarov's decision also rests on his love for his grandson, Laxus. A grandfather's responsibility is weighty, and Makarov feels the time has come to atone for any failures of the past. In Lucian, he sees not only a successor, but the promise of a brighter future for Fairy Tail. Had Lucian not been preparing to embark on that century-long mission, the president might even have considered handing over his office to him once the magical parade concluded.